Amy Baker. On November 14, 1986, Jacqueline Lard's routine day at her Stafford County real estate office turned grim when she vanished after work. The following morning, a scene inside her office revealed signs of a violent altercation, and her body was ultimately located hidden beneath a carpet in a wooded spot several miles away. Advancing to 1989, Amy Baker, an 18-year-old who had been visiting her family, disappeared while returning home. Her abandoned automobile was discovered, igniting a mystery that stretched across decades. How were these two incidents connected, and what advancement finally led to their solution in 2024? Amy Baker, an energetic young woman born on March 16, 1971, in Springfield, Fairfax County, Virginia, brought joy to her family as the treasured daughter of Mark Baker and Sue Easler. In a major shift in life, the Baker household, which also included Amy's younger brother David, moved from the lively surroundings of Falls Church to the calm community of Hartwood in Stafford County. This transition came from her parents, Mark and Sue's wish for a more spacious home and a measure of peace away from the hectic atmosphere of Fairfax County. Amy, while becoming familiar with her new environment, frequently went back to Falls Church, a place full of recognizable faces and valued memories, to see friends and relatives. The Baker residence created a supportive space that encouraged Amy's developing interests. She was passionate about field hockey, showing her abilities on the varsity squad, and loved preserving memories through photography. With artistic ambitions, Amy set her goals on attending an art school in Savannah, Georgia. In the meantime, she enjoyed working as an event photographer at the local shopping mall, where she took pictures of children with seasonal characters like the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, preserving joyful memories for families. In contrast, knowledge about Jacqueline Lard's childhood is less extensively detailed. Born in 1954, Jacqueline worked as a devoted real estate agent in Stafford County and was married to Ronald Lard. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Together they raised their two children. Jacqueline Lard, both a committed professional and a caring mother, held significant responsibilities at her job and within her household, though limited details exist concerning her personal hobbies or background. On November 14, 1986, Jacqueline vanished in Stafford County, beginning a puzzling and unsolved mystery. She was last observed around 9 p.m. at Mount Vernon Realty, not knowing it would be the last moment of her life. The next morning, her office exposed a troubling scene suggesting a violent struggle. Detectives from Stafford County, supported by the Virginia State Police Crime Scene Unit and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, thoroughly examined the region in search of evidence, including Jacqueline and her missing vehicle. Only one day later, two young people playing in a wooded section of Woodbridge made a shocking discovery: Jacqueline's body hidden beneath discarded carpeting, confirming her tragic death. Her deserted car was later discovered in Fairfax County on December 18. Although the collected evidence did not produce immediate outcomes, it would eventually prove essential in resolving her case decades afterward. Amy Baker's account unfolded in an equally unsettling fashion. On March 29, 1989, the 18-year-old's trip to visit her parents came to a sudden end on Interstate 95 when her car broke down. Abandoning her blue 1970 Volkswagen Beetle, she walked toward a nearby Exxon station. Through the night, Amy's failure to return home greatly worried her mother, Sue Baker. Even while attempting to explain Amy's absence as an independent choice, Sue increasingly feared a tragic result as daylight neared. In desperation, Sue searched for her daughter, phoning hospitals, towing companies, family members, and law enforcement, only to learn that Amy's vehicle had been left abandoned the previous evening. The reaction to Amy's disappearance was divided, with early speculation by authorities suggesting she might have intentionally chosen to disappear. Yet, the surrounding circumstances cast doubt on that initial assumption. Amy's possessions were left behind, and her car was located in an unusual spot, directly contradicting the notion of a voluntary absence. Although law enforcement made efforts, even deploying a helicopter, Amy's family felt obligated to act on their own. Sue Baker, along with her sister-in-law, Mary Ballet, armed themselves with handmade missing person posters and relentlessly searched the region. Their commitment to keeping Amy's case visible stood as proof of their persistence, despite the limitations of the pre-digital era. In time, Their search brought them to a devastating discovery near the Backlick Road Bridge. Amy's body, concealed beneath foliage, was located just a few yards from where she had last been seen. This heartbreaking discovery on Good Friday permanently altered the Baker family's lives. The tragedies, though separated by time and circumstances, carried a shared element of unresolved questions and the suffering endured by families left in uncertainty. The investigation into Jacqueline Lard's premature death was met with a joint effort that included multiple law enforcement agencies on both state and federal levels. The Stafford County Sheriff's Office, Prince William County Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Drug Enforcement Administration united to create a strong task force committed to solving the mystery of her death. Even after extracting DNA from gathered evidence and performing extensive searches through both Virginia and national DNA databases, the killer's identity remained hidden. Many individuals of interest were evaluated, and familial DNA searches were attempted, yet no meaningful progress appeared, forcing the inquiry into a deadlock that eventually went cold. The discovery of Amy Baker's remains became a decisive turning point in her investigation. Driven by the urgent search for Amy, law enforcement promptly secured the area. The image of Amy's nearly unworn tennis shoes, gifted for her 18th birthday, served as a chilling confirmation of the immense loss her mother had suffered. Despite the rapid response that came after the grim discovery, the handling of Amy's case by law enforcement left her family disillusioned and upset. Criticisms were directed at the early search efforts, which the grieving relatives regarded as insufficient. They mourned the heartbreaking reality of having to locate their loved one themselves, a task they believed should have been completed by police within the first critical days of Amy's disappearance. The autopsy findings revealed a horrifying picture. Amy had endured violence, assault, and strangulation, her life tragically taken shortly after leaving her vehicle. The inquiry advanced into a homicide case, leaving both her family and the community stunned and mourning the deep loss. After Amy's murder, police reached out to the public for assistance, concentrating on two suspicious vehicles spotted near Amy's abandoned car, an early 1980s dark-colored Buick and a blue Ford Escort. Despite their appeals and a flood of tips following the news of Amy's death, one significant call to Crime Stoppers remained an elusive lead that never developed into a resolution. The caller, thought to hold vital knowledge, never reached out to authorities again despite repeated requests. This unfulfilled lead, paired with the urgent appeals for the caller to come forward once more, underscored the obstacles and frustrations that plagued the investigation. With no further progress, the case eventually went cold. In the persistent quest for justice for both Jacqueline Lard and Amy Baker, investigative teams, propelled by determination and advanced forensic technology, secured a critical breakthrough that finally resolved these enduring cold cases in 2024. Sheriff Decatur of the Stafford County Sheriff's Office, who had been part of the Lard investigation since it began in 1986, guaranteed the case never truly went dormant. His commitment to seeking justice for Jacqueline was mirrored in the dedication of the detectives pursuing Amy Baker's case, each driven by unshakable resolve. The breakthrough in both cases emerged when retired. Detective Dave Wood chose to employ forensic investigative genetic genealogy, merging DNA examination with genealogical research to bring new clarity to the identity of the killer. Parabon Nanolabs, a prominent company specializing in DNA phenotyping, played an essential role in this effort. Through their advanced analysis, they connected the DNA evidence from Jacqueline Lard's murder scene to that from Amy Baker, definitively linking the two cases for the first time. Investigators examined the circumstances surrounding Amy's tragic death, determining that her vehicle had run out of fuel and concluding she may have been searching for assistance when she encountered her attacker. This crucial information added depth to their comprehension of her last moments and underscored the savagery of the assault. In 2021, cold case detectives from the Fairfax County Police Department submitted their evidence to DNA Labs International, which produced a complete DNA profile. When this profile was entered into the Virginia State Database, it revealed a direct tie to the ongoing investigation of Jacqueline Lard's murder. This connection between the two cases represented a decisive moment, advancing the investigation with renewed commitment. On December 14, 2023, detectives uncovered a family name that could be linked to the suspect, setting them on a trail that ultimately pointed to Elroy Neal Harrison, a 65-year-old living in Stafford County. This identification was the outcome of decades of thorough investigation, groundbreaking technological methods, and an unyielding pursuit of justice by everyone involved. Subsequent investigation of this lead and the securing of a search warrant for Harrison's DNA reinforced their suspicions. In February 2024, the Department of Forensic Science verified the match using the DNA obtained from Harrison. Thus, after nearly 40 years, the mystery surrounding the deaths of Jacqueline Lard and Amy Baker was conclusively solved. Elroy Neal Harrison, a name unknown until the historic resolution of these long-standing cold cases, had been born in 1959. Although many aspects of his early years remain unclear, the known details depict a man who once lived among the residents of Stafford County, Virginia. His life, however, shifted dramatically in 1983 when he was arrested for a bank robbery in Virginia, which led to his imprisonment. Harrison's incarceration came to an end on June 30, 1986, when he was released back into the community. This timeline is significant as it directly preceded the tragic incidents connected to Jacqueline Lard and Amy Baker. On March 4, 2024, a major breakthrough was achieved in the decades-old cold cases of Jacqueline Lard and Amy Baker, when Elroy Neal Harrison was indicted by a grand jury in Stafford County. The accusations brought against him were grave, including first-degree murder, abduction with the intent to defile, and aggravated malicious wounding of Jacqueline Lard, in addition to breaking and entering with the intent to commit murder. The next day, on March 5, 2024, law enforcement officials apprehended Harrison at his home in Stafford. At 65 years old, Harrison was confronted with the full weight of the justice system as he was booked into the Rappahannock Regional Jail in Stafford, charged with murder, abduction, assault, and burglary. Denied the possibility of bail, Harrison awaited his arraignment, a critical step in this decade-spanning case, scheduled for April 5, 2024. This moment signaled the beginning of the legal process against him. Over the years following the devastating loss of Jacqueline Lard and Amy Baker, their families have undertaken a difficult journey of grief and perseverance. Edwin Lard, Jacqueline's son, stands as a clear example of strength. Even though he grew up under the shadow of his mother's unresolved killing, Edwin made the choice to dedicate his life to serving others. He first pursued work as a Navy medical corpsman before later moving into a career as a paramedic. Yet, his dedication to aiding others did not stop there. Edwin eventually became the executive director of Rescue Task Force, a consulting organization focused on threat protection. As the father of 3 daughters and 1 son, Edwin represents the unshaken determination of his family. He strongly declares, while his mother may have been the killer's victim, he refuses to allow himself to be one. Neither he nor his family will surrender to victimhood. This steadfast refusal to let tragedy define them is equally reflected in the Baker family, who have embraced resilience in the face of an immeasurable loss. Moving on to the next case. Ashley Fawless. New Year's Eve was meant to be a night filled with enjoyment. Relatives and friends gathered at the Fawless residence, celebrating, laughing, and dancing. Ashley Fawless stood at the center of attention, smiling and relishing the occasion. To those around her, she appeared joyful. Yet behind the surface, matters were not as flawless as they looked. Then, just after the clock passed midnight, everything shifted. A single gunshot shattered the party's cheer. Attendees rushed to the bedroom, confusion quickly turning into panic. Within moments, a frantic 911 call went out. When emergency responders arrived, Ashley was lying on the ground, unresponsive. A firearm rested nearby. Her spouse, Tom, was the only person present with her. He told officers it was a terrible misfortune, something nobody could have prevented. Yet as investigators began raising questions, the details failed to align. A neighbor insisted she heard Ashley shout right before the shot. Others recalled friction between her and Tom. And then came the most pressing question of all. Was it truly an accident, or was there something deeper occurring? What exactly took place inside that bedroom? Ashley and Tom had first met during the spring of 2007 on an online dating site. From the beginning, Ashley's lively character and endless energy drew Tom in, and their connection quickly grew. Ashley was already a committed mother to 2 daughters from an earlier marriage, and the relationship moved forward rapidly. Within 12 months, they had a son, and just 2 weeks after his birth, they were married. By 2010, Tom had legally adopted Ashley's daughters, cementing their family circle. They adjusted to life together, but by the end of 2011, strains began to appear. Their daughters were then 9 and 6, while their youngest had just celebrated his 3rd birthday. His condition of hydrocephalus required repeated surgeries, creating a tremendous weight for Ashley. Managing her son's medical demands, raising her children, and coping with increasing marital pressures left her emotionally exhausted. In 2010, Ashley Follis was dismissed from her job at North Colorado Medical Center, officially for insubordination and hostile conduct. She challenged the ruling in court and obtained a settlement, but the legal win provided little relief from her growing personal hardships. The following year, she briefly rekindled a romance with a high school sweetheart, further worsening her already fragile marriage. Around the same period, Ashley pursued psychiatric help for recurring panic attacks, sometimes suffering as many as 5 each week. She was prescribed medication to control her anxiety and balance her mood, yet her mental health remained a serious struggle for both herself and Tom. Even after learning about her unfaithfulness, Tom decided to remain in the marriage. Investigators would later locate old divorce documents in their bedroom, papers Ashley had written back in 2009 when the pair considered separating because of clashing work schedules. In the end, they chose to persevere and mend their relationship. Over time, Tom felt they were making progress. He had obtained steady employment as a corrections officer, while Ashley discovered purpose in giving public talks, recounting her experiences as a mother of a child with hydrocephalus. She offered advice and assistance to other parents facing similar difficulties. Then, only weeks prior to the tragic evening, Ashley used a home pregnancy test. To her shock, the outcome turned out positive. It was an unexpected revelation, since she had undergone sterilization after their youngest son's birth. Holding on to hope that the result was correct, she promptly stopped taking her prescribed medication for anxiety. Yet on December 31, 2011, merely hours before they were scheduled to host a New Year's Eve party, Ashley began her menstrual cycle. A follow-up test confirmed she was not pregnant after all, delivering a painful setback to both her and Tom. That very morning, the pair had been discussing whether reversing her procedure could be an option. Years before, Ashley's mother had advised that decision, but now the choice lay solely with them. Both Ashley and Tom conveyed a wish to grow their family, and the unforeseen development left them in a heavy emotional state as they got ready for the evening gathering. Their home soon filled with relatives and friends as they welcomed the new year. In spite of her inner distress, Ashley maintained a bold exterior, drinking, dancing, and enjoying time with her loved ones. Her parents, Joe and Jenna, later remembered that she appeared as spirited and resilient as always. Still, according to Tom, beneath her joyful surface, she was wrestling with emotions invisible to others. That night, as the festivity continued, a conversation between Ashley and Tom took a strained direction. Tom later stated that their talk had risen into an argument. Hoping to avoid further dispute, he claimed he had walked away. During his police interview, investigators observed scratches on Tom's chest and neck, marks that quickly stirred suspicion. When asked, he explained the ones on his chest came from irritation caused by shaving for the first time, while those on his neck, he insisted, could have resulted from stress. As the questioning grew more forceful, Tom felt trapped, maintaining that he was being wrongly accused. He consistently declared his innocence, asserting that he was not in the room when the firearm discharged and that he had no involvement in Ashley's death. As the inquiry progressed, detectives began interviewing neighbors and inspecting the scene for possible evidence. One neighbor stated she had heard Ashley shout, "Get off me," only moments before the gunshot was fired. Her account directly conflicted with Tom's explanation of events. When asked about the alleged shouting, Tom adamantly denied it. He claimed he had never forced Ashley into anything against her will, but investigators remained dissatisfied with his statements. They emphasized that Ashley's gunshot wound was located at the back of her head, a position that made self-inflicted injury highly unlikely. In reply, Tom demanded forensic analysis to establish his innocence. He pressed authorities to examine his hands for gunshot residue and also insisted that Ashley's hands be tested to determine if she could have fired the gun. Even with his cooperation, detectives stayed unconvinced. The circumstances of the shooting, combined with inconsistent reports, left too many unresolved doubts. While Tom remained in the police station, Ashley was in the hospital, where doctors struggled to preserve her life. Sadly, only hours after her arrival, she succumbed to her wounds. When Tom was notified of her death, he appeared shattered. He claimed that in the moments following the shooting, while holding Ashley in his arms, he noticed her breathing and sincerely believed she still had a chance to live. After 3 hours of questioning, investigators had neither obtained a confession from Tom nor succeeded in removing him as a suspect. As the interrogation continued, his frustration grew, and he repeatedly stated that he would never harm his wife. However, just 4 days following the shooting, Ashley's death was officially ruled self-inflicted. The medical examiner's determination was issued before laboratory testing had even been finalized, leaving Ashley's relatives in shock. Her parents, Jenna and Joe, were enraged, convinced the case had been mishandled. They believed Tom's employment in the county correctional system had influenced the decision, providing him an unfair edge in the matter. Although Tom served in a different law enforcement branch, making direct links to the investigating detectives difficult to verify, the family felt his background factored into why the case was closed so swiftly. To guarantee transparency, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation became involved, but serious mistakes had already occurred. Tom had not been separated from other witnesses at the crime scene, a breach of standard investigative protocol. Even more critical, his hands had not been adequately covered to preserve potential gunshot residue, evidence that could have been vital in determining what truly took place that night. Jenna and Joe believed detectives only began regarding Tom as a person of interest after their repeated demands. Even then, they felt the investigation remained shallow. They faulted law enforcement for questioning Tom for only 3 hours, which they considered far too short for the primary individual tied to a suspicious death. Ultimately, Tom was permitted to go free. After the tragedy, Tom left the state with the children, moving to Indiana to live near his sister. He registered for college, hoping for a new beginning. But Ashley's parents refused to allow the case to be forgotten. Determined to pursue justice, they reached out to the press, speaking publicly about their daughter's passion for life and their conviction that she would never have chosen to end it. They also highlighted Tom's record of a quick temper, presenting a portrayal far different from the one seemingly accepted by law enforcement. Their persistence attracted the attention of investigative journalist Justin Joseph, who discovered a crucial witness, 17-year-old Nick Glover, a neighbor of the Fallis household. Nick remembered that on January 1, 2012, as emergency crews arrived at the Fallis home, he overheard Tom say to Ashley's parents, "I shot my wife." What Nick disclosed next was even more alarming. He declared that he had given this information to detectives during an interview, yet there was no reference to his statement in the official police records. The absence of documentation raised significant doubts about the credibility of the investigation. The idea that detectives might have purposely omitted essential testimony to protect Tom from scrutiny led to accusations of misconduct and concealment. Ashley's relatives and advocates called for a more thorough inquiry, convinced the truth had been suppressed and that justice for Ashley was still unmet. In April 2014, more than 2 years after Ashley's death, the Evans Police Department resolved to reopen the case. Fresh allegations had surfaced, claiming that detectives had deliberately left out crucial evidence and changed a witness's account to support the theory that Ashley had ended her own life. In spite of these assertions, law enforcement officials continued to insist that the original investigation had been both comprehensive and impartial. On November 18, 2014, authorities arrested Tom Fallis near his residence in Indiana. He was charged with second-degree manslaughter, but firmly maintained his innocence. The case had already drawn widespread public interest, largely fueled by investigative reporting from Justin Joseph. Even as the trial approached, many questions still lingered. Among them was the meaning of bruises discovered on Ashley's legs, which some speculated were connected to a flashlight found at the scene. Yet further review revealed the flashlight belonged to an officer who had tried to perform first aid and had no relation to the shooting. The prosecution constructed its case on the argument that amid a heated quarrel, Tom seized the handgun Ashley kept under the mattress, pressed it to her head, and pulled the trigger. He then carefully placed her body on the floor before contacting emergency responders. During the trial, Ashley's mother testified on the stand that Tom had acted aggressively at the New Year's Eve celebration, using harsh language that led to conflict. Tom rejected these claims. Later, she also revealed a family history of mental illness, noting that both Ashley's grandmother and uncle had died by suicide. The prosecution relied on this information to suggest Ashley might have chosen to end her own life. However, Ashley's psychiatrist offered a different account. He testified that as of December 2011, she displayed no indications of depression. Meanwhile, the defense argued that Ashley had been consulting 2 psychiatrists and a therapist simultaneously, which resulted in overlapping prescriptions. They proposed this could have contributed to mood fluctuations or emotional instability. Forensic professionals gave contradictory testimony. One specialist, who had spent extensive time reviewing the evidence, stated that Tom could not have fired the deadly shot. He highlighted that perpetrators of crimes of passion seldom stop after firing a single bullet. Another forensic professional examined the case files and personally inspected the crime scene. He concluded that Tom had been extremely close to Ashley when the gun discharged. According to his analysis, if Tom had been positioned farther away, the blood spatter would have been more widely distributed. His findings were supported by the recorded sequence of events detailing how Tom reached Ashley and attempted to give assistance. The prosecution relied heavily on this interpretation to counter the defense's case. Another significant element of the case involved Ashley's emotional difficulties related to pregnancy. Although an autopsy confirmed Ashley was not pregnant at the time of her death, it revealed that despite her tubal ligation, she still retained the ability to conceive. According to testimony in court, during the 9 months preceding her death, Ashley had believed on 3 separate occasions that she was pregnant. Prosecutors contended these false alarms had taken a heavy emotional toll, intensifying her ongoing struggles. Psychiatrists called to testify described how such experiences could have deeply influenced her mental condition. As the trial continued, Nick Glover, a pivotal witness, took the stand. He stated that on the night of Ashley's death, he overheard Tom say to her parents, "I shot my wife." This remark became a central point for the prosecution. Another witness, Chelsea, was also anticipated to support the assertion that Ashley had cried out, "Get off me," prior to the gunshot. However, Chelsea's testimony shifted in an unexpected way. Nick's mother, Kathy, had earlier said that Chelsea had clearly heard the dispute. Yet when Chelsea testified, she admitted she had been drinking heavily that evening and could not distinctly remember the events. Even so, Nick held firm in his version, declaring he would never forget what he had heard. With clashing witness accounts and disputed forensic interpretations, the trial turned into a struggle of perspectives, leaving the jury with the challenging responsibility of deciding what truly occurred that night. Nick Glover's testimony drew the attention of investigators, leading to an internal review of the officer who had originally interviewed him on the night of Ashley's death. The review sought to determine whether the detective had deliberately failed to record Tom's supposed confession. However, the inquiry eventually found no evidence of misconduct, and the detective asserted that Nick had never made such a statement during their interview. During cross-examination, the defense probed Nick's testimony, highlighting several contradictions. They stressed that although Nick claimed to have heard Tom admit to shooting Ashley, he had continued a friendly relationship with him for months afterward. He had even taken part in family gatherings, such as camping trips and Christmas celebrations. When asked why he had remained close to Tom despite allegedly hearing him confess, Nick responded over and over, "I don't remember," more than 90 times. Later, another witness, a police officer, offered his own account. He stated that when he reached the scene, he heard Tom yelling, "I can't believe I shot her. I can't believe she's dead." This remark appeared to be a possible breakthrough for the prosecution, but the defense promptly raised questions. They noted that the crime scene had been filled with officers, emergency personnel, family members, and neighbors, yet no one else reported hearing Tom make such a confession. Moreover, the police had not detained Tom at the location, citing limits to their jurisdiction. Increasing skepticism, the defense revealed the lead detective had never formally recorded the officer's account. He waited 3 years before referencing the alleged admission, and his trustworthiness was further undermined when it emerged he had later been fired from the sheriff's office for dishonesty. Those disclosures seriously undermined the prosecution's case and eroded the credibility of their witnesses. Physical evidence likewise failed to corroborate the state's theory. Gunshot residue testing found no traces on Tom's hands, while residue was detected on both of Ashley's. Scratches on Tom's chest, initially interpreted as indicators of a struggle, were subsequently shown to contain no trace of Ashley's DNA. Similarly, nail scrapings from Ashley's hands did not reveal any DNA belonging to Tom. These results call into question the prosecution's claim that a physical altercation had occurred between the couple prior to the fatal shot. Throughout the trial, Tom elected not to testify on his own behalf. The proceedings spanned several weeks and included testimony from more than 40 witnesses. The defense framed its closing arguments around Ashley's personal hardships, stressing the emotional impact of her repeated pregnancy scares, her son's medical issues, the effects of her prescribed medications, the loss of her job, and her extramarital relationship. They contended these elements had contributed to her vulnerable mental state in the months before her death. A startling turn in the trial was the presentation of letters purportedly written by Ashley. In these alleged goodbye notes, she apologized to Tom, described herself as a failure, and stated she could no longer go on living. Ashley's family immediately disputed their authenticity. They noted the letters had appeared years after her death and insisted Ashley had never shown any indication she would have written such messages. To them, the letters appeared fabricated, intensifying their conviction that Tom was responsible for her death. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours, including a 1-hour lunch break, before delivering a verdict. Tom Fallis was acquitted of second-degree manslaughter and all associated charges. The outcome devastated Ashley's family. Her parents remained certain that Tom had been involved in Ashley's death. They filed lawsuits against the Evans Police Department, claiming crucial evidence had been hidden or falsified. However, the lawsuits were eventually dismissed. Despite the legal ruling, Ashley's family refused to accept the verdict. They continued to believe Tom was guilty, yet they stayed dedicated to preserving their bond with Ashley's children. Through court arrangements, they obtained visitation rights, guaranteeing their continued presence in the children's lives. Meanwhile, Tom endured financial strain from escalating legal costs. He concentrated on restoring his life while continuing his education. Wanting a new beginning, he relocated with his children to another state to live nearer to his sister. To them, he explained that their mother's death had been a tragic accident, though he intended to share further details when they grew older. Even after the trial concluded, unresolved doubts lingered. Every new disclosure seemed to generate more questions than answers, leaving the case surrounded by uncertainty, one that, for Ashley's family, remained far from resolved. Moving on to the next case. David Nobling. On September 21, 1987, a sheriff's deputy in Isle of Wight County located David Nobling's Ford Ranger pickup truck abandoned at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge during a nighttime patrol. The truck's doors were shut but unlocked, the driver's side window was rolled down, and the radio continued playing, yet no occupants were present. 2 days later, a beachcomber discovered the bodies of Nobling and Robin Edwards, ages 20 and 14 respectively, along the shoreline of Ragged Island, roughly a mile from the James River Bridge. Both victims had been shot at close range in the back of their heads. State Police spokeswoman Corinne Geller confirmed that the case remained unsolved for 36 years. During the investigation, Wilmer was one of several suspects considered by authorities. However, it was not until after Wilmer's death, in 2017, that a genetic sample could be obtained and compared with the DNA preserved from the crime scene. At a press conference on January 8 at the State Police's regional headquarters in Suffolk, Geller announced that the Virginia Department of Forensic Science had issued a certificate of analysis verifying a genetic match to Alan Wilmer Sr. The DNA sample taken from Wilmer's body also corresponded with the DNA of the offender responsible for the rape and killing of Teresa Spa Howell, a 29-year-old woman discovered deceased in Hampton in 1989. According to Captain Rebecca Warren of the Hampton Police, Howell was last observed alive on July 1, 1989, at 2:30 a.m. at the former Zodiac Club, a popular nightclub located off Mercury Boulevard. Roughly 8 hours later, construction workers came across women's clothing near a wooded area off Butler Farm Road, which led them to the unidentified remains of a female. After Howell's family filed a missing person report in York County, police confirmed the remains were hers and established that she had been strangled to death. 3 days afterward, items of Robin's clothing were also discovered near the crime scene at Ragged Island, inside Nobling's truck. In a 2022 interview with the Smithfield Times, given before the 35th anniversary of the unsolved crime, Jeanette Edwards Santiago, Robin's older sister, revealed further details. At that time, Santiago was 19 years old and living independently when her parents phoned her on Saturday, September 19, 1987, asking if she had seen Robin that evening. Santiago replied no, explaining, I didn't think much of it then because she had run away a couple of months earlier and had been gone for 2 weeks. Santiago also shared that she and Robin had not been speaking since Santiago had reported her sister for riding her bicycle from their parents' home in Newport News all the way to the Coleman Memorial Bridge in York County. According to Santiago's mother, Robin had arranged a date with Jason, the cousin of David Nobling, on September 19th, which turned out to be the last time anyone saw David or Robin alive. Jason, David, and Michael, David's brother, arrived at the Edwards home in David's Ford Ranger to take Robin to a movie, which was sold out. Instead, the group visited an arcade before dropping Robin back at her parents' house around 10 p.m. Once home, Robin put her younger sister Pam to bed, but later went out again with David. Why they ended up crossing the James River Bridge to Ragged Island, and whether they did so voluntarily, remains uncertain. During the press conference, authorities provided no further information about how or whether Wilmer had known his victims. For 36 years, our families have lived in uncertainty, stated representatives of the Nobling and Edwards families in a joint release. We have lived with the fear that the individual responsible for deliberately killing Robin and David could harm someone else. Now we can find comfort and justice in knowing he can no longer hurt anyone. They added, "We are not claiming these cases are closed. They are resolved for now, but we recognize that there is still much to be done," echoed Geller. She explained that the next step is to attempt to construct a chronological account of Wilmer's life to determine if there were additional victims. Alan Wilmer, who was 63 at the time of his death in Lancaster in 2017, had been employed as a commercial fisherman when the Ragged Island murders occurred. He owned and often lived on a 1976 fishing vessel named the Denny Wade, which he docked at marinas in Gloucester and Middlesex counties, as well as across Hampton Roads. He was known to drive different trucks, including a recognizable 1966 blue Dodge Fargo pickup with the personalized license plate EM Raw, which may have referenced his main livelihood of clam and oyster farming. According to Geller, Wilmer was also widely known by the nickname Pokey. Beyond his fishing work, he ran a tree service and was an avid hunter. Geller declined to share additional details on how or when law enforcement began to suspect Wilmer in either of the crimes. Geller explained that part of the cold case approach involves carefully reviewing and reanalyzing every witness statement and piece of evidence, a task that is lengthy and complex but ultimately highly effective. Because Wilmer had no felony record, authorities did not have his DNA on file and were unable to acquire a sample until after his death in 2017. Wilmer, Geller noted, was among several suspects whose newly obtained DNA was submitted for testing. In a written statement handed out during the press conference, Wilmer's family described their absolute and devastating shock upon discovering the DNA match. "The man who committed these crimes was not someone we knew," their statement read. "The disclosure of his deeds has profoundly impacted our family as we struggle to reconcile the man we thought we knew with the unimaginable acts he committed. We grieve deeply for the victims' families and the community, and they remain in our prayers. We cannot comprehend the depth of their suffering over all these years. Please let us know if you knew Wilmer, the kind of relationship you had with him, and any encounters you experienced so we can build a timeline and identify whether there may be other victims," Geller urged the public. Former Isle of Wight County Sheriff Charlie Phelps, who assumed the Ragged Island investigation when he took office in January 1988, told The Times in 2022 that he had long suspected another man, Samuel Reeder, whom the new DNA evidence now appears to clear. Soon after starting his tenure as sheriff, Phelps investigated the reported theft of guns from a woman's house in Isle of Wight and became suspicious of her son. The son later admitted to stealing a firearm from his mother's home and pawning it in Mississippi, but he also implicated a roommate, Reeder, who had been living with them in Isle of Wight. According to the book A Special Kind of Evil, The Colonial Parkway Serial Killings by Blaine Pardo and Victoria Hester, Reeder, then 28 years old, was the person who had given one of the initial tips to the sheriff's office during the inquiry into David's and Robin's disappearance. Phelps remembered that Reeder at first claimed he had gone to Ragged Island out of curiosity on September 23, 1987, the day the bodies were found, but later changed his account to say he had seen Nobling's truck parked there several days earlier. In his last version of events, Reeder acknowledged taking cash from Nobling's wallet left in the vehicle, but denied any role in the murders of David and Robin. A 2022 report on the unresolved Ragged Island case disclosed that Reeder was discovered dead inside his Chesapeake mobile home on the morning of August 8, 1990, at age 31, hanging from a doorknob with an electrical cord tied around his neck. Moving on to the next case. Keely Rodney. In this video, we examine the mysterious case of Keely Rodney, a teenager who disappeared after a summer celebration meant to honor freedom and friendship. Keely Rodney went to a gathering with friends in the Tahoe National Forest after finishing early from high school. Authorities state she departed a gathering at a location early on the morning of August 6, 2022, and was never seen again. Keely had a caring family and many friends. She was intelligent and skilled. The next few weeks would mark her first year at college, so she was eager to spend some time with friends before leaving. Nobody believed that having fun at a park so close to home could prove so dangerous. Many individuals, both civilians and officers, searched for Keely, but nobody was prepared for what they discovered. On Friday, August 5, 2022, it was a wonderful day in the Tahoe National Forest, and Mount Shasta could be seen far away. Because of the fires from the earlier summer, wildflowers were blooming and adding purple and yellow to the landscape. As the summer drew to a close, people tried to enjoy one final fun day or two before going back to classes. Keely Rodney left high school early and performed very well. That is not simple. This coming week, she was beginning Sierra College, and her family was very proud of her. On Friday, August 5th, she prepared creme brulee with her friends. Later, she was going to attend a summer farewell gathering at Prosser Camping, which is about a 40-minute trip from Reno and near the state border, but only around 15 minutes from Keely's residence. The Prosser location is beside a wide lake and is called the Sanctuary by residents. Friends could have one last enjoyable moment here before leaving for college to begin new journeys. Keely had arranged to meet her closest friends the next morning, August 6th, at around 9 a.m., but she never appeared. It turned out that no one saw Keely after August 5th. Keely was raised in Truckee, California. Lindsay and Daniel, her parents, cared for and valued her greatly. Her brother, who was 8 years old, thought she was the greatest person in the world. Keely and her family lived in a more secluded part of Truckee. Some might even describe them as off-grid, which is the way many people in California's mountain towns live. Keely lived her ordinary life in this manner. She was recognized for being very cheerful, so it was evident that her off-grid lifestyle was working well for her. She eagerly awaited the weekend to finally arrive, so she could attend the camping party with her friends. When Keely departed for the gathering around 6 p.m. on August 5th, her parents had no idea that they would never see their daughter again. At about 6 p.m. on the 5th, Keely stopped at a gas station in Truckee, roughly halfway between her home and the party. Security cameras captured her glancing around the store. A few hours later, around 10 p.m., Keely and her friend Magdalene reached the site. There, they joined another friend, Sammy Smith. Sammy and Keely spent most of the event together, sharing drinks and taking brief breaks to chat with other people. The gathering was intended for teenagers from the local area, but word quickly spread about the party at the campground, and soon, teens from across Northern California began heading to Prosser to attend. Different accounts indicate that between 200 and 300 individuals were present that evening. Attendees at the event were not allowed to start a campfire because wildfires were frequent in the region. This meant the site was completely dark unless other lights were provided. Many are said to have illuminated the space with glow sticks, battery candles, and their vehicle trunk lights. Naturally, Keely and her friends had attended gatherings like this before. When questioned by reporters, Keely's mother explained that her daughter never once drank and drove. Keely was far more intelligent and responsible than that. This is confirmed by Keely's friends. They stated they never observed Keely drink at a gathering and then drive afterward. For this reason, Lindsay had no concern in allowing Keely to attend. Around 11 p.m., the girls went to Keely's silver Honda CR-V to charge her phone. They sat there talking for a while sipping some drinks. During their conversation, Sammy requested a ride home that night. Lindsay recalls receiving a text from Keely at around 11:30 p.m. saying she was leaving the party and heading directly home. Lindsay trusted that her daughter Keely would arrive home when she promised because she had seen how much effort she put into finishing early with honors. There was no doubt in her mind that Keely would return soon. She responded with a text telling Keely to be safe and that she loved her. Keely answered, "Okay, I love you too." Between 11:30 p.m. and 12:20 a.m., Sammy decided Keely was too intoxicated to drive her home and arranged another ride. The girls parted ways. Sammy told authorities that she said goodbye to Keely at 12:25 a.m. At 12:36, only minutes later, Sammy said Keely had called her again to ask about her ride. Sammy assumed Keely was still at the gathering because she could hear voices in the background, but she could not be certain. Sammy did not realize that this would be the final time anyone would speak with Keely. When Lindsay woke up the following morning, Keely was not in her room and her car was not in the driveway. After calling several times and failing to reach her, she immediately contacted law enforcement to report that Keely was missing. However, the police did not issue an Amber Alert. They claimed there was no evidence that Keely had been abducted. They searched the location where the gathering was held and interviewed about 1/3 of those in attendance. Police asked additional attendees to step forward, but many of the young people were reluctant to talk. Many of them were preparing to start college and feared that what they had done at the party might negatively affect their future in some way. Officers emphasized that nobody would face charges for anything that took place at the gathering. They only wanted to locate Keely, but this did not change the attitude of those present. They largely stayed silent. News of Keely's disappearance spread rapidly, yet none of the more than 200 attendees claimed they had seen anything. Still, Keely and her vehicle were not located. How was that possible? Someone had to have noticed something. Sammy decided to organize a meeting with everyone who had attended the gathering that evening. There were to be no investigators involved. She arranged this so that people might feel more comfortable speaking with their friends and peers, but nothing new emerged. On several occasions, Sammy told police that she was the final person to see Keely. Sammy and Keely's other friends mentioned how the aggressive older men at the party had made them feel uneasy. This was the point when Sammy and her friends decided to leave. This caused many people to laugh out loud. Friends would not abandon one friend if they knew she had been drinking and that older men were present, making the younger girls uneasy. Sammy mentioned that there were hundreds of pictures and videos from that evening, yet none of them revealed anything about Keely's condition or location. Authorities had no clue how to proceed. At last, days after Keely initially went missing, police confirmed that the final time her phone connected to cellular data was at 12:33 a.m. This was approximately when she spoke on the phone with Sammy. There was no chance that what happened immediately after that call could have been positive. The search for Keely began with the police receiving their first and only clue. Sammy was instantly significant to the case because she had spent so much time with Keely on the night she disappeared and later gave several interviews to the press. Someone realized her friend had been drinking and offered her a ride home, but she declined the offer. Sammy stated this in an interview when questioned about what she thought had occurred to her friend. One of the earliest theories was that Keely may have crashed on her way home. The roads in this mountainous region can be difficult to navigate, particularly if you are a new driver who has been drinking and it is late at night. Let me explain something to those who have never driven in the mountains. Certain roads can be difficult even during daylight. If you add alcohol to the situation along with the darkness, things are almost certain to end badly. Sammy Smith and Jagger, who was said to be Keely's ex-boyfriend, assisted in the investigation. But interviews with Sammy and Jagger in the media exposed issues to the public. People had conflicting opinions about the connection between Keely, Sammy, and Jagger. Many claimed that Keely and Sammy were not as close as Sammy had told investigators. When Keely vanished, she was not even connected with Sammy on social media. Yet online investigators discovered that Sammy was connected with Jagger. Many began to suspect that something far worse had taken place when Sammy and Jagger asked on social media that all tips in person be delivered to them rather than to the police so that they could, quote, filter information. This, along with what many viewed as suspicious conduct, led people to believe that the girl who claimed she was Keely's friend might have had something to do with her disappearance. Jagger publicly requested that anyone with leads reach out to him. On August 11th, the Placer County Sheriff's Department posted on Twitter that they had never instructed Jagger to gather witness statements or evidence. They made it explicit that all information needed to be submitted to them directly. This increased the suspicion surrounding Jagger and Sammy. As images and recordings from the party began surfacing, they were provided to law enforcement for review. The search for Keely Rodney became more difficult by August 12, 2022. Authorities and volunteers inspected her home and the last place she had been observed, looking for anything that might help locate Keeley. The Placer County Sheriff's Office described their extensive searches during a town hall meeting held the week after she disappeared. Journalists were informed that the search extended as far north as Sierraville and east to Verde. They searched all around Truckee to the south and west, beyond the Jackson Meadows Reservoir, for her. This covered approximately a 25-mile radius from her last known location. Locals assisting in the search stated they did not believe Keeley or her vehicle remained within the more than 800,000-mile-long Tahoe National Forest. Keeley might have been anywhere in this vast, stunning region, which contains everything from rugged peaks and thick forests to clear lakes and flowing rivers. If she had been in the forest, the search crews were confident they would have located her already. There was conflicting information about Keeley's connections with Jagger, Sammy, and other attendees. So many people feared the worst while still hoping for the best. Meanwhile, authorities continued piecing together small fragments of the case. At a press briefing on August 12th, police reported that they had received word from locals that an adult was attempting to stop individuals from speaking out. This prompted police to set up a completely anonymous online system where people could upload photos, videos, and other evidence related to Keeley's disappearance. By this stage, the case was becoming increasingly unusual. It was obvious that someone possessed knowledge and was making every effort to keep it concealed. By August 13th, police had conducted another press briefing where Public Information Officer Angela Musalem stated that they had intensified their search for the weekend. She explained that on August 12th, a ground search and rescue unit had discovered what they believed could be a potential burial site near the campground while operating in the area. She added that Keeley's family had been informed and that the FBI, along with the Placer and Nevada County Sheriff's offices, had responded to the location. After additional investigation, they determined the remains were of a dog. Angela then addressed the public, saying, "Let me be clear. We have one team, one mission, and one goal, and that is to locate Keeley Roden." The 9th day of the missing person inquiry concluded, and the Placer County Sheriff's Office was still pursuing 720 leads, hoping for one piece of information that might guide them in the proper direction. At the same time, individuals across the nation continued speculating about what had happened to Keeley, waiting for the next clue. Occam's razor suggests that the simplest explanation is typically the correct one. Yet since an accident appeared less probable with each passing day, what was the next simplest explanation? What else could cause a person to vanish from a party without leaving a trace? For a little more than 2 weeks, Keeley's family remained unaware of their beloved daughter's whereabouts. Her friends were accused by strangers across the nation while law enforcement worked tirelessly to locate the young girl. But then there was a breakthrough. Adventures with Purpose, a YouTube program that focuses mostly on cold cases, pulled Keeley Rodney's silver CRV out of the Proser Reservoir on August 21st, 2022. They were searching for the missing person. They are experts at underwater recoveries. And when Keeley first went missing, many people who knew about their work asked them to help look for the girl. The team was happy to do so. According to AWP, the police asked for their help, but when they got there, they were told that the lake had already been searched thoroughly by dive teams and that there was nothing in it. At 10:40 a.m. on August 21st, the search began in the Prosser Reservoir. 2 sonar boats were sent out, and at 11:15 a.m. one of them found an object 55 feet offshore and in only 14 feet of water using a special Garmin sonar device. Nick, one of their divers, went into the water and using the license plate to confirm that it was Keeley Rodney's car. A body was then sent down into the vehicle's cargo area. Adventures with Purpose says that the Garmin EchoMap Ultra they used to find the car costs about $2,500, which is a small investment for a police force this size. It also seems like a good investment for search and rescue teams. If this technology is so important for underwater searches that a simple YouTube channel was able to buy one, why aren't search and rescue teams in the area using it? The FBI must have the most up-to-date technology, so why couldn't they find the car in the 2 weeks they helped local authorities look for it? When AWP found Keeley, they posted about the recovery mission on Facebook. The team says they reached out to police first because they were working with them to find Keeley. But at the press conference the next day, a spokesperson for the sheriff's department said that AWP never reached out to them and that the police had to go out of their way to contact the team. People have been skeptical about this information because AWP has such a great reputation. Some even think that local police are embarrassed that they missed something. When Keely's car was found, it was terrible for her family and the community. It was even worse when police said that the body they found in the back of the car was unfortunately Keely. After this, most people would think that was the end of the case. But things kept getting stranger, and people started to doubt the efforts of local police to find Keely. Doug and Nick of Adventures with Purpose say that they have a unique and rare set of skills, and that helping police in this way is an honor. They support law enforcement across the U.S., including the FBI. But when news of the discovery spread, many people who were following the case started to wonder how could the men from Adventures with Purpose do in less than 2 hours what several agencies, big and small, couldn't do in 2 weeks. Adventures with Purpose found Keely's car upside down in an area that had been extensively searched by police. This made many people question the competence of local police, which was a fair question. A trail camera in the area shows that at 12:32 a.m. on August 6th, a car drove straight into the water where Keely was found and the exact spot where her cell phone last pinged. The local police said they spent over 15,000 man-hours looking for Keely, but in less than 2 hours, another team found her in the same spot where her phone last pinged. Views from above clearly show something in the water where her body and car were found. So if air searches were done, how was this missed? If she drove her car into the water, it would have gone through the sand. How were those tracks missed when her mom reported her missing the next morning, less than 12 hours after she went missing? As we've already talked about, Doug Bishop from AWP said in an interview that he found the situation extremely suspicious. He points out that Keely was very smart on her way to college and disappeared from a big party, only to be found a few hundred yards away. He also says that Keely couldn't have gone the wrong way down the road, because there was only one way in and out of the area, and she knew the way very well. But the road her car ended up on had a very sharp left turn onto a rough dirt road that needs four-wheel drive. Basically, Keely would have known right away that she wasn't going in the right direction, which makes her crash even more strange. Bishop also thinks it's odd that Keely was found in the vehicle's cargo area. He says that Keely probably would have had time to crawl back there if the windows were up, but we don't know why she would have done that. Also, when the car was found, many of the windows were rolled down, so the car would have filled with water so quickly that she wouldn't have had time to crawl back there. And why would she? She could have easily climbed out of the window and gotten to safety. It doesn't make any sense that she got stuck in the back of the car. According to reports, more than 400 individuals die each year when their vehicles become trapped in water. The best chance of survival is to exit the vehicle before it becomes completely submerged. Most cars sink entirely in under a minute, meaning every second is crucial. Specialists advise rolling down the windows immediately and escaping through the front ones, not the rear. But this raises additional questions about Keely's situation. The driver's window and other windows appeared to have been down when the vehicle was recovered from the water, yet she was discovered in the back of her car. In addition, the driver's side mirror was broken off, and there was a dent in the driver's side door. Neither of these damages existed when she left her residence. So where did this damage originate? Other cars retrieved from water did not display broken mirrors or damaged doors. What occurred with Keely's vehicle? If more than 200 people were present, how did no one hear it enter the water? Much remains unknown about this case, yet Keely's autopsy findings quickly delivered the official explanation, one that many refused to accept. Keely's death was determined to be accidental in the autopsy released on Thursday, October 13, 2022. The official statement concluded that she drowned. This ruling shocked many locals who harbor doubts, since the chief of police and the coroner are the same individual. They argue that numerous crimes in the region are either concealed or labeled as accidents because the area depends on tourism, and a reputation for crime would harm the local economy. I agree with this belief. In fact, it is one of the primary reasons my wife and I left our hometown. In the months before we relocated, we witnessed 3 separate death scenes. One was located beside an apartment building. Another was in a ditch along a major highway. The third was somewhere I cannot recall at the moment. Yet none of these incidents were ever officially documented. They were all concealed because the town was a tourist destination and they did not want to lose that revenue. Keely was fully clothed when she was discovered deceased, and there were no indications of an assault. The toxicology findings revealed caffeine, nicotine, and trace levels of THC in her body. Liver tissue analysis indicated alcohol in her system with a BAC of 0.08, which is just under the legal driving limit. However, numerous specialists argue that the ethanol levels detected were likely the result of the body metabolizing alcohol, leaving many to question whether Keely was intoxicated at all. These roads are not illuminated. They are twisting dirt paths without markers. Could it be that Keely made a wrong turn and drove directly into the water, despite being familiar with the area many times before? If so, what prevented her from escaping through the window that was already open? The most striking detail in the autopsy findings is that her lungs contained no water. The medical examiner noted that the lung weights were unusually low for a drowning case. If someone had drowned, there would have been significant water in the lungs, but there was not nearly enough to confirm it. Detective Sonier stated that Keely's death had to be classified as an accident because no evidence of foul play existed. I don't know about you, but this only convinces me that the investigators did not search thoroughly enough to uncover the evidence required. Clearly, they have a record of failing in this regard, since her vehicle was found in a location they claim to have searched multiple times. Ultimately, Keely's family and friends will forever carry a void in their lives. Furthermore, they have never been able to establish exactly what happened to Keely. I don't know about you, but I could not find peace without clear answers. Nevertheless, in spite of this heartbreaking loss, I hope it stands as a very meaningful reminder. Never abandon a friend. Although this tragedy could have been prevented, it has provided police, party attendees, and those engaged in true crime with crucial lessons. Keely did not have to lose her life that evening, but I hope her story will help protect others from dying in the same way. Moving on to the next case. Lauren Giddings. In this video, we examine the chilling case of Lauren Giddings, a young woman with a promising future ahead of her, whose life was tragically ended by someone alarmingly close. Macon is a city located in central Georgia. Lauren Giddings, 27, was introduced to us. Lauren was the eldest among her two sisters, Sarah and Caitlin, and was born to Karen and Bill. They said that Lauren's puppy Butterbean was the real star of the family and that they shared a very close bond. Lauren had always possessed a strong ambition to become a public defender. She relocated from Maryland to Macon, Georgia, in the spring of 2008 to pursue this goal. Residents of Macon describe it as calm and unhurried. It is usually a quiet and peaceful place to live and study, with everyone being friendly. Never one to meet a stranger, Lauren quickly adjusted to her new surroundings. She had met corporate attorney David Vandiver at his Atlanta law office 4 years earlier, and the two maintained a long-distance relationship. David said she was remarkably intelligent for her age, even though she was 20 years his junior. They connected immediately, sharing a similar work ethic and a dry yet amusing sense of humor, supporting each other through particularly challenging personal and professional periods. According to David, she was articulate, intelligent, and very level-headed. Lauren even managed to win over his highly protective older sister, which he described as extraordinary since nobody else had accomplished it before. Lauren had no awareness that David had already chosen the perfect location for his intended proposal. They briefly separated, however, as the great distance between them after her move had created difficulties. Lauren had started seeing another student named Joe, but she soon realized she still felt deeply for David and wanted to reconcile. Joe was understandably heartbroken when she ended their relationship, though they remained close friends. By June 2011, Lauren had recently earned her law degree from Mercer University's School of Law, one of the nation's oldest. David and her entire family attended her graduation, along with her dog Butterbean naturally. Now Lauren was eager to apply all she had learned and dive headfirst into the next stage. Passing the Georgia bar exam was the upcoming major milestone, so she devoted every spare moment to studying. She told people that after attending her sister Caitlin's wedding in Maryland following graduation, she needed time to focus and dedicate herself to her career. Caitlin's special day was made even more memorable by the understanding that it would be the last time the entire family would be together for a while. Lauren had decided to remain in Macon rather than return to Baltimore after graduation, unlike many other students. She lived in Unit 2 on the second floor of Bars Hall. Situated directly across from the university, Bars Hall was designed specifically for law students. It made sense for her to stay there a little longer so she could continue visiting, speaking with professors, and using the library while preparing for the bar. However, her peaceful and comfortable sanctuary in her apartment soon began to feel completely different. Lauren had mentioned something to her sister that she was convinced was happening but could not verify, and it seemed strange. Upon returning home from an outing, she noticed objects had been moved, as if someone had entered her apartment. She felt as though she was being watched, yet there were no signs of forced entry, leaving her unsure of how this could be happening. Her concern persisted, and late on the evening of June 25, 2011, she emailed David to share her worries. David reassured her that it was probably just some troublemakers with no real intent to harm. She might have been becoming slightly stir-crazy without realizing it, as she was working intensely and rarely left her apartment. Part of Lauren's mass message read, "Hey guys, I'm hunkering down to study for the bar. Please don't take it personally if I don't reply to emails or texts." In the days that followed, no one heard from her. She spent most of her time studying, with the exception of attending church and occasionally working out. Therefore, a few unanswered calls or messages were not immediately alarming. However, she had been silent when her sister Caitlin and closest friend Katie attempted to check in on her multiple times. It was strange that Caitlin received no response to any of the pictures she sent while on her honeymoon. It began to seem as though something was wrong, rather than her merely being focused on other matters. Caitlin contacted Ashley, a fellow student, and asked her to go check on Lauren's apartment. Ashley tried calling her as well before leaving, but Lauren's phone was suddenly going straight to voicemail. Lauren's car remained parked outside when Ashley and her boyfriend arrived at the flat. They unlocked the door using a spare key. Since Lauren was planning to move out and live with David, it was not unusual that her belongings were somewhat scattered. However, they discovered Lauren's laptop, mobile phone, legal books, and purse items. All things everyone agreed she would never have simply disappeared without taking. After reviewing her calendar, they confirmed she was indeed scheduled to move out the following day, June 30th. So where had she gone? Ashley called friends and acquaintances living in the same complex. Others searched the surrounding area, and even Lauren's ex-boyfriend Joe began looking around the university. She had left the morning after, and everything had seemed fine, but it was generally agreed that the last time anyone had heard from her was at an end-of-year party 4 days earlier. A few hours later, she had sent David an email expressing concerns about the apartment. After calling the police the following morning with no results, her family decided to drive the nearly 12 hours to Georgia to assist. Officers arrived at No. 2 Bars Hall promptly at 9 a.m. They observed that nothing appeared stolen and that there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Yet, it was evident to everyone that something was wrong. One of their initial actions when searching her rooms was to use luminol spray to check for traces of blood. When applied in Lauren's bathroom, the results were drastically different. Even though all other areas appeared clean, blood had clearly been present throughout her bathtub. Authorities believed they were now searching for Lauren's body. On a hot, windy day, June 30th, they were moving their search outdoors to plan a new strategy when a strong gust of wind blew in, carrying a foul stench toward them. They were standing near some bins when a strange odor stopped them in their tracks. It was unmistakably the smell of human decomposition. "The wind began to shift while we were standing there," one officer remarked. "We all encounter unpleasant smells in life, and one of the worst you can experience is that of a dead or decaying body." When police lifted the lids, they found something horrific that would remain with them forever. It was a black bag containing a woman's torso. Although testing was required, they were convinced it was part of Lauren's body due to her disappearance and the luminol results from her bathroom. "This was something I had never seen before. Who could commit this? Only a monster could do such a thing. It was horrific," one detective said. Strangely, the garbage collection truck had been unable to enter and remove everything because police vehicles were blocking the entrance. If the officers had not been there at that precise moment, everything would have been gone by the time the search began. Testing later confirmed that it was indeed Lauren Giddings' torso. Although the cause of death could not be determined, the chief medical examiner later stated there were no signs of sexual assault. They did conclude that she had been murdered and mutilated on June 26th. As Lauren's apartment, particularly the bathroom, was dusted for fingerprints and evidence, it became clear that the space had been thoroughly cleaned, and luminol was the only tool detecting anything. The perpetrator had attempted to conceal the crime and had cordoned off the outdoor area. They did not want anyone in the complex to know she had been found in case it prompted them to flee or destroy additional evidence. You have to examine who is closest to the victim, either romantically or geographically, one officer said. Ashley, Joe, and others involved in the initial search were brought in to provide information. They also spoke with her partner, David, who was distraught, though his alibi checked out and he had been away on a golf trip in California. It was evident that he had no involvement. Joe, Lauren's ex-boyfriend, was quickly ruled out for similar reasons. Authorities were eager to search every residence on the block to begin eliminating possibilities. Everyone, except Stephen McDaniel, 25, was happy to cooperate. So they asked, why would this be an issue? It's the lawyer in me. I'm always protective of my space, he said. He had lived next door to Lauren since their first year of law school and was a fellow student preparing for the bar exam. Furthermore, he had actually been present when Lauren and her friends were first being searched for. A few hours earlier, they had invited someone to visit the station. They observed him while the remainder of the block was searched. He behaved oddly, refusing to help in any way, yet lingering and ensuring he was involved in everything. Stephen spent the entire day there, monitoring everyone's actions and following the police as they entered and exited homes. When the media began interviewing him, he attracted even more attention. He was among the first to speak with reporters and share his opinions regarding Lauren's potential fate. At this point, only a few people knew what had been discovered in the dumpster, and Stephen spent a long time staring off into space once the interview concluded. A few hours later, he finally allowed police to enter his apartment. He was hoarding food, energy drinks, and various weapons. When they opened drawers, they found multiple items, including some condoms. Stephen muttered something about being a virgin and saving them for marriage as the police removed them. He initially told them he was using the dating app eHarmony, but was not getting many dates. When asked why he had the condoms, he muttered something about breaking into 2 nearby apartments and randomly taking them, due to his strange behavior. Police arrested him for burglary and took him in for additional interrogation after he admitted to breaking into other people's houses a few feet from Lauren's residence. He was now completely mute, despite his desire to speak with the media and be aware of everything that was happening. He was hesitant to provide answers, and his statements were inconsistent. Most of the responses were yes, no, or I'm not sure. In addition to this, his demeanor was peculiar. According to the police, they had never witnessed someone react in such a manner during an interrogation. Officers had to occasionally ask him to look them in the eyes because he sat virtually motionless the entire time, hardly moving his head. The sped-up interview video emphasizes how strange his very still sitting posture is in contrast to the officer's normal manner. He stayed there, staring straight ahead, even after investigators left the room. Detective Patterson was now beginning to grow tired of hearing him say, "No, and I don't know," over and over. He was certain that this was the individual responsible for Lauren's terrible experience. Additionally, Stephen disclosed that he had 2 scratches on the area immediately above his hip. Stephen's flat was being completely dismantled while the interview went on. He somehow possessed a master key that allowed investigators to enter every room in the building. They discovered a pair of pants that was returned to Lauren Giddings after testing. The packaging for a hacksaw and multiple flash drives that eventually turned out to contain explicit and upsetting pictures and videos of youngsters. He was frequently on her social media pages, according to his search history, and he would be looking at these while simultaneously searching for and viewing violent pornography. They discovered that in addition to exposing his twisted ideas on forums, he had written blogs about torturing and killing women. It was all unsettling, and it was obvious that he was fascinated with Lauren based on the number of times he had looked up her name. Finding Moan's garbage collection hours was one of his most recent and final searches. In the maintenance room in the condominium, they found the hacksaw that matched the package found in his unit. It was covered in blood. CCTV has verified that he was the one who purchased the hacksaw. Both of these were returned to Lauren, along with a bloody sheet. Stephen was the only other person who somehow possessed a key to enter this room, and the maintenance man had already been ruled out. Lauren was killed by this. But why in the world had Stephen McDaniel done this? And who was he? Stephen's classmates described him as awkward, uncomfortable, and hard to talk to. He would pose strange questions about death, obsessing over a zombie apocalypse, and carrying out the ideal murder. He would test participants on how they would cover up a potential murder. In fact, Stephen was chosen as the student who was most likely to be famous. According to his fellow law students, he was always prepared for an argument, even if he was completely incorrect, and he cockily believed he was the brightest person in the room. Other kids claimed that he was quite content to dispute and disagree, and he would quarrel with everyone, including Lauren. It was obvious he wasn't there to make acquaintances. One individual claimed to be an average student, as did their teachers. He wasn't really noteworthy, but he did have a distinctive voice. His time at university was finally coming to an end, and he wasn't sure where he was going next. He had no friends and no plans for the future as he finished school. He was a little lost. Lauren had made a concerted effort to be his buddy and support system when they moved in next door in 2008. When they noticed that he was rushing about the complex by himself, she even took the time to introduce him to her mother, Karen. On the night before their graduation, Karen ran into him once more. She said there was something about him during her second conversation with him. The thought of his living next to Lauren kept coming to mind. He always kept the windows and drapes closed, which I found strange. She answered, "You never saw him." Despite Lauren's best efforts to be kind, he made her feel uncomfortable in the same way that he did most people. Lauren discussed Stephen's behavior and their disagreements in class in an email she sent to David in 2008, the year she moved in. "I got the stink eye," she said. "He's trying to harm me." However, Lauren had clearly caught Stephen's eye, and he had repeatedly asked her out. She simply wasn't that interested in him. Even if she was in a relationship, she was definitely keeping her distance from him from now on, and she was only being courteous whenever she saw him. On August 2nd, 2011, Stephen McDaniel was charged with Lauren Giddings' murder based on all they had discovered. Later on, he was additionally accused with 7 charges of child exploitation. His attorneys asked for $100,000 bail, but it was set at over $1 million. After all of his devices were examined, a grand jury indicted him on 30 charges of child exploitation in addition to 1 count of murder. The prosecution did point out that, despite the overwhelming evidence against him, the case was still primarily circumstantial. His DNA was not on the hacksaw, nor was it discovered in the bathroom. Therefore, there was nothing connecting him to her other than the pants. Just like he had done with the condoms, he might be able to justify the pants as something he had stolen. They were still unable to establish the reason or time of death. Nevertheless, they were certain and prepared to put him on trial. It was terrifying to see that further evidence will soon be brought to their notice, which solidified everything. They discovered a video on a memory card that was stolen from his flat, proving that Stephen had been following Lauren for a while. She had good reason to be concerned about someone observing her and breaking in. He had been filming Lauren's house through the window the night she was killed. After attaching a camera to the end of a wooden pole, he held the pole up so he could see through the blinds into her chambers. As soon as he saw this, Prosecutor David Cook declared, "That's the guy." For Lauren's burial a few days later, St. Mary of the Mills Church was packed with hundreds of people. They could only bury her torso that day because, despite everyone's best efforts, just that had been recovered. When Stephen McDaniel filed a not guilty plea, the defense was getting ready to present the claim that the police were scheming against him and had repeatedly broken into his flat to plant evidence. In a further twist, Lauren's teacher in a course that helped her transition from law school to the practice of law had been one of Stephen's defense lawyers with whom he briefly collaborated. He claimed that although he had enjoyed teaching Lauren and had admired her, he did recall that she opposed the death sentence. He therefore pushed to have it dismissed, knowing that the prosecution was already fighting for this. Stephen changed his mind with the help of his solicitors when the prosecution agreed to drop the child's exploitation allegations, and offered him a settlement, as everyone got ready for what would be a very difficult trial. Stephen McDaniel eventually entered a guilty plea to killing and dismembering Lauren in April 2014, 1 week before the trial was scheduled to begin. According to one of his former lawyers, McDaniel's case took a turn for the worse when the computer evidence began to surface and continued to do so. He eventually decided that the increasing amount of evidence they were finding about his computer and camera was sufficient to secure a conviction before he was scheduled to be sentenced. The prosecution provided the evidence attesting to his character prior to his sentencing. They read out some of Stephen's purported forum posts and played the recording of Lauren's house. Among them was the following: "I received my legal degree. Drink alone in front of my computer and party hard. Watch my attractive classmate neighbor arrive home late. Ask her to join you for a nightcap. Make her a Mickey Finn, a unique beverage that is meant to make people unconscious. She's completely unconscious. At last, I misplaced my V-card. She died after oating, oh no. I celebrated losing my V-card by barbecuing her arms and legs. She threw out her body, but she wasn't into organ meat. LOL. While the police are finding her remains, it is broadcast on television. Virgins, are you crazy? But the validity of this was called into question since some people said it was internet trolling. And even though the prosecution was certain it was him, it is still debatable. He had to confess to the court what he had done that day as part of his plea agreement. And he said that this is what transpired. He used the master key to unlock her door. At about 4:30 a.m., he had on a mask, gloves, and all black. He claimed that although he was standing there observing her sleep, she must have sensed something was off because she woke up suddenly. He jumped on her and clamped his hands around her throat before she could even get out of bed or comprehend what was happening. After struggling, the two tumbled to the ground. He claimed that Lauren snatched his mask and removed it, calling his name and screaming for him to stop. When she recognized him, he strangled her for about 15 minutes while she fought him off and wailed till she finally stopped breathing. After pulling her into the bathroom, he placed her in the bathtub. For the remainder of the night and the next day, he left her there. He returned with tools, including a hacksaw, on the evening of June 27th and proceeded to dismember her, a process he detailed in gruesome detail. He allegedly placed pieces of her in various bags and disposed of them in trash cans located throughout the university campus. However, assuming it would be taken soon, he placed her torso in the trash can next to the apartment building. He tore his gloves, his shirt, and his mask apart and threw them down the toilet. Stephen said he had not attacked Lauren, and the medical examiner had found no evidence of assault. I never took off the pink running shorts she was wearing when she passed away. Just as I had left them, they were discovered on her torso, he testified in court. People still couldn't believe it, even after nearly 3 years had passed. Stephen also agreed that Lauren had been amiable and considerate to him since they first met. He said that he had been in a deluded, dreamy condition since that night, and had persuaded himself that Lauren was still alive. It's hard for me to explain why I killed Lauren and tried to hide my act the way I did, he stated. I'm aware that it was terribly incorrect. I don't have any delusions or lack morals or decency. It must be explained by something in my physiology, psychology, or neurology, possibly by my own unique disorder. He expressed regret to the family and that he misses Lauren every day, but he doesn't ask for their pardon. I can never deserve it in any way. I would go back and change what happened, he stated. Lauren's strong opposition to the death penalty was the sole reason the prosecution chose not to seek it. Her family acknowledged this and expressed their wish that he live a long life in prison under the harshest conditions possible. Stephen McDaniel received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. After being sentenced, he sent a lengthy letter from prison, claiming that he had been intimidated by the police and that his case had been unfair from the very beginning. He demanded a new trial that he considered fair. Accordingly, for years later, he filed an appeal representing himself and called over 10 people for testimony, including his former attorney, whom he was now suing for damages. In his complaint, Stephen requested that the court award him $50,000 for legal fees and an additional $250,000 in punitive damages for the alleged negligence of his lawyer. He also filed a motion asserting that Howard Sims, the Bibb County judge, had discriminated against him. The appeal was denied. In 2022, the now 37-year-old filed another appeal, claiming that his attorneys were incompetent, that the prosecution had stolen documents, and that his rights had been violated. He requested to be released from prison and to have his conviction overturned. We hope the truth comes out, added Mark, Stephen's father, in support. All we are praying for is that. However, because the appeal was filed more than a year late, the judge ruled that it could not even be considered, and it was again denied. According to the judge, McDaniel would have understood that his request was premature if he had exercised reasonable diligence rather than naively blaming the Georgia Supreme Court. This matter is still pending, and Stephen has already submitted yet another appeal. Stephen's father even created a GoFundMe to help cover his legal expenses, but it raised nothing, and the page was quickly removed. Some of Stephen's relatives and friends continue to claim his innocence. Caitlin, Lauren's sister, called it pathetic and delusional. Before his death, his grandfather Hollis gave an interview about visiting him in prison. "I guess I'm a broken-hearted grandfather if everything the police say is true," he added. "He sits there quietly when you go in, and you can't get anything from him. You want to take him to a doctor, but he's not a little child anymore. He's grown, and it just breaks your heart. Whether you like it or not, you have to accept what's in front of you. I got him a lawyer immediately because I felt it was the right thing to do at the time. I assumed that after he posted bail, he would go home, but my God, he just looked different when I saw him." Glenda, his mother, also defended him and seemed convinced of his innocence at the time of his arrest. She added that she had dreams of him serving as a justice on the Supreme Court. "I have a big hug for him when he gets out, and he has one for me," she said. However, from the viewpoint of the police, the prosecution, and Lauren's family, the trial had concluded, and the correct decision had been made years earlier. Although he may have been a recluse, Caitlin, Lauren's sister, noted that she might have been one of the few who was genuinely kind to him and offered him some attention. Advising children not to go to certain parts of town or to lock their cars is not part of this story. There is no, she shouldn't have done this. And it would not have happened because one should always treat people with kindness. You should always treat your neighbors with compassion. A person is not necessarily different simply because of their appearance. In this case, however, he truly was. Investigators believe that on that day they prevented a predator, a potential serial killer, and a danger to children. Once selected as the most likely to achieve fame in his youth, he is now infamous for committing one of the most horrifying acts the town has ever witnessed. Police recognized that the case could have gone cold, and that Stephen might never have been apprehended if the garbage collection service had emptied the container where Lauren's torso was discovered. They praised her family and friends for acting so swiftly. Furthermore, investigators believe there is more to the story and that Stephen has never been fully truthful about what occurred. Detective David Patterson stated, "I'm sure there are things he will never tell anyone. Obviously, we know she died, but we don't fully believe anything Stephen McDaniel has said." Lauren's sister, Sarah, added, "He doesn't seem like a very honest person to me. In my opinion, he can make up a million stories. He can imagine things extremely vividly." Authorities continue searching for Lauren's remains, believing they may be located on a 62-acre property belonging to one of Stephen's relatives. Legal experts anticipate that he will spend the rest of his life in prison, even though he is eligible for parole in 2041. Every milestone and event Lauren would have attended is celebrated by her family, as though she were present and participating. Each year, they also organize runs in her memory. Caitlin, her sister, named her daughter Lauren Magnolia in her honor. Macon has 2 memorial plaques commemorating her, one at Mercer Law School and the other on a pink bench in the downtown district's Washington Park, where she loved to run. Moving on to the next case. Lexi Draper and Scarlett Vaughn. On January 15, 2018, Louise Porton dialed the 999 emergency number, reporting that her 3-year-old daughter, Lexi Draper, was unconscious and not breathing. Despite the critical situation, when paramedics arrived, Louise's composure appeared disturbingly calm. As they rushed to treat Lexi, they were confronted with a haunting image. A motionless child, her skin shaded blue, with her jaw locked shut. In spite of their frantic attempts, it was too late. The 3-year-old was declared dead at the scene, yet the tragedy did not stop there. Only 18 days later, Louise made another call, this time to the 111 non-emergency helpline, claiming that her 17-month-old daughter, Scarlett Vaughn, was not breathing. In such a dire emergency, why did Porton call 111, a non-urgent number, rather than 999? Did she genuinely mistake the two, or was there something more sinister motivating her decision? The deaths of both children quickly raised suspicion around Louise, leading authorities to scrutinize her background more closely. As investigators dug deeper, troubling details from Louise's past emerged. Born in 1996 in the town of Walsall, near Birmingham in the UK, Louise grew up alongside her mother, Porton, and 2 siblings. From an early age, even during childhood, Louise's conduct proved challenging for her family. While the family maintained a close bond, Louise often stood apart, displaying manipulative and deceitful tendencies. She routinely lied to her parents and sought to manipulate her siblings and cousins, frequently landing them in trouble. More disturbingly, Louise exhibited violent tendencies toward her siblings and cousins, even threatening them with physical harm on multiple occasions. As she grew older, her relationship with her family deteriorated further, particularly with her mother. Her mother's affair and eventual departure during Louise's teenage years deepened her resentment toward her. Unlike her siblings, who continued to maintain some contact with their mother, Louise severed ties completely. During her adolescence, her behavior worsened. She frequently argued with family members, neglected her education, and even faced run-ins with the police. Reports indicated she engaged in theft and consistently demonstrated cold and selfish behavior. Additionally, Louise's apparent promiscuity became a serious concern. She consistently sought attention from men, often leveraging physical intimacy to obtain gifts and money. This behavior carried into her adult years, where she expanded her activities to online platforms, engaging with numerous men in exchange for money and material benefits. Alongside this, Louise remained active online, regularly posting photos to attract male attention. She engaged in cosplay, dressing in various costumes and sending pictures in return for payments or gifts. As time passed, her photos became increasingly revealing, and she began presenting herself as a model. Louise registered with multiple modeling agencies, including one named Purple Port. However, the credibility of Purple Port was questionable, with some online reports suggesting it might be linked to exploitative practices. Despite these potential risks, Louise pursued modeling opportunities and even offered intimate services to photographers in exchange for money. Beyond her modeling efforts, Louise became a mother in late 2014 at age 18, giving birth to her first daughter, Lexi. Nevertheless, she did not settle down and continued her lifestyle. Despite motherhood, Louise maintained a strained relationship with Lexi's father, Chris Draper. Louise also had conflicts with her family, which were worsened by her online behavior and unwillingness to prioritize her daughter's needs. When her grandmother died, Louise's refusal to visit or attend the funeral deepened her estrangement from her family. Despite these tensions, Louise had another child, Scarlett, at age 20 with the same father as Lexi. As the children grew, Louise's conduct became more troubling. She spent hours each day on dating apps and websites, seeking casual encounters and profiting from these relationships. Louise often left her children with others or under the care of her landlady, while she went out to meet strangers. This reached the extent that her children spent more time with the landlady than with their own mother. In certain instances, she even brought these men into her home, directly endangering her children. Family members and acquaintances became increasingly concerned about the safety and well-being of Lexi and Scarlett. They reported Louise to social services, yet no action was taken. The situation grew worse as Louise began perceiving her children as a burden, especially when they interfered with her physical pursuits. As Louise's life further spiraled downward, her relationship with her children's father, Chris Draper, stayed strained. She even denied him any contact with Lexi and Scarlett, going so far as to give Scarlett a different surname, Vaughn. Matters escalated when Louise chose to move the family to Ski Dad Rugby, an hour away from Chris, effectively severing his connection to his children. Louise's sister, Karen Porton, had also tried to provide support whenever possible. However, Louise's priorities remained distorted. Many of the men she associated with were blatantly unsuitable, with one even referring to her children dismissively as babies. Family members continued to voice concerns to Louise, but she disregarded their warnings and often mocked the situation. Speculation arose that Louise may have administered sedatives to her children to keep them unconscious while she pursued her own interests. Over the following months of 2017, this neglect and mistreatment took a serious toll on Lexi and Scarlett, who were left to fend for themselves during their mother's absence. As Louise's relationship with her children worsened, so too did her mental condition. She became increasingly aggressive and verbally abusive, lashing out at her children over minor provocations. On multiple occasions, she subjected Lexi and Scarlett to physical violence, beating them to control their behavior and silence their cries. Social services continued to neglect intervention, leaving Louise free to persist in her destructive course. As Louise became more consumed by her desires and increasingly incapable of handling the responsibilities of motherhood, she reached a grim decision and formulated a plan to rid herself of the burden her children had become. On January 2, 2018, Louise contacted her sister, expressing concern about Lexi experiencing a seizure. However, Louise only made the call after Lexi's condition had already deteriorated severely. This neglect persisted even after Lexi was released from the hospital, with Louise prioritizing her dating activities over her daughter's health. Meanwhile, Louise's Google searches revealed a more disturbing reality to investigators. She had searched for information on suffocation, breathlessness in children, and how it might lead to death. Gradually, investigators realized that these searches were not motivated by genuine concern, but by a far more sinister intent. Tragically, just 2 days later, on January 4, 2018, Lexi became gravely ill. Louise called 999, claiming her daughter had stopped breathing. However, her emotionless tone during the call raised even more doubts about her sincerity. When paramedics arrived, they found Lexi in critical condition, her lips, fingers, and eyes turning blue. It was clear she had been in this state for an extended period before Louise finally called for help, exposing the depth of her neglect and indifference toward her daughter's life. Paramedics struggled to understand how a previously healthy child like Lexi could experience 2 life-threatening episodes within such a short time. During Lexi's 4-day hospital stay, Louise remained at the hospital but used the opportunity to send messages and explicit photos of herself to men, even flirting with hospital staff. After Lexi was discharged, doctors could only determine that a possible chest infection might have caused her symptoms. Lexi was taken back home, and Louise's behavior continued to be cold and manipulative. CCTV footage from the hotel captured Louise and her children returning from the hospital, and her demeanor at that time clearly indicated she had no interest in caring for them. She exploited her daughter's health issues to solicit money from men, claiming she needed financial help to care for Lexi. Louise's Google searches also became increasingly alarming as she looked up methods of self-harm and information on resuscitation and death. It became clear she was researching ways to kill her daughter while making it appear accidental. Investigators had gone through the searches she made January 2nd and 4th, and over time, Louise's Google searches became more specific, focusing on the timing of calling emergency services after causing a person's death. She had even searched how long would a body take to turn blue over suffocation. This revealed her intention: to ensure that she could still dial 999 after murdering her daughter, but not so early that she could be revived. Despite her heinous intentions, Louise continued to deceive men by fabricating her daughter's health condition, claiming that she was dying from a deadly flu. It seemed that her lack of empathy and the extent to which she was willing to manipulate others for her own twisted purposes knew no bounds. On January 14, 2018, the tragic incident unfolded, when Lexi and Scarlett had visited Louise's sister, Karen. After returning home at 6 p.m., Lexi's health suddenly deteriorated again. Louise called 999, claiming her daughter was unconscious and not breathing. When paramedics had arrived, they found Lexi unresponsive, with signs of rigor mortis, indicating she had likely been dead for several hours before the emergency call. Despite their best efforts, Lexi was pronounced dead at the scene. Despite the heartbreaking loss of her daughter, Louise continued her manipulative behavior. It was found out that she had accepted 41 friend requests on her dating app very next day and exploited Lexi's death to solicit money from men. She even set up a GoFundMe account for her daughter's funeral, potentially using the donations for her personal gain. Her insincere Facebook post about Lexi further highlighted her lack of genuine grief. In the days following Lexi's death, Louise was seen laughing and joking with friends, even at her daughter's funeral. But this didn't stop there. Scarlett wasn't any different than Lexi to her mother and was also a burden to her. At the funeral, Louise's mother appeared in her life after Lexi's death, offering to help plan her funeral. Concerned, Louise allegedly mentioned that Scarlett might meet the same fate as Lexi, but no one reported her suspicious behavior to the authorities. On February 1st, just 18 days, her words came true. Louise and Scarlett stayed in a hotel room, and despite Scarlett being healthy, her condition suddenly deteriorated. Louise messaged the men she was seeing, asking for £30 to cover petrol costs for taking Scarlett to the hospital. These men urged her to call an ambulance, but Louise only wanted attention and money. At 9:50 p.m., Louise left the hotel with Scarlett, but she didn't rush to the hospital. Instead, she drove around town taking her time and acting nonchalant, as if her daughter's life wasn't in danger. Surveillance footage from traffic stops in Hillmorton showed her driving aimlessly around the city with no attempt to contact emergency services. She stopped at a gas station, where cameras recorded her movements. In the footage, Louise appeared completely unconcerned, taking her time while her daughter was on the brink of death inside the car. No sense of urgency or distress was evident in her demeanor. After about 30 minutes, she eventually pulled into a shopping center and chose to dial 111. For context, in the UK, 111 is a non-emergency line, while 999 is the number for emergencies, yet she still opted to call 111. By the time paramedics arrived, Scarlett was already lifeless. It was later determined that she had been dead for several hours before Louise placed the call. Doctors concluded that her death was consistent with deliberate airway obstruction, and once again, Louise showed almost no concern at the sudden and suspicious circumstances. There was no medical explanation for why either of the children would die this way. When questioned by paramedics, Louise simply claimed Scarlett had the flu. In both Lexi's and Scarlett's deaths, forensic experts carried out detailed post-mortem examinations. Findings confirmed that their deaths were deliberate and not accidental. Lexi had died from intentional airway obstruction, with examiners noting marks on her nose suggesting it had been forcibly covered. She also had scratches on her neck, evidence that she fought back against her mother's hands during the suffocation. Scarlett, at just 17 months old, had also died from airway obstruction. She showed bruises on her neck and head, trauma to her neck muscles, and bleeding in her lungs. Blood from Scarlett was even found on a pillow in the hotel room where her death occurred. Despite this overwhelming evidence, Louise never confessed nor expressed any remorse. Although there was not sufficient evidence to formally arrest her at the time, investigators persisted with the case, fully convinced that Louise was responsible for the murders of her innocent children. Nearly a year later, in January 2019, police finally gathered enough proof to charge her with the murders of both daughters. On March 20, 2019, Louise was arrested. In August 2019, her trial began after she pleaded not guilty. Overwhelming evidence was presented against her, including her conversations on dating apps, her neglectful behavior toward her children, and the post-mortem results. On August 3, 2019, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Louise Porton was ultimately sentenced to 32 years in prison. However, many consider this sentence insufficient, given her young age of just 23 years at the time. Concerns remain that she could be released early for good behavior. Throughout the trial, she displayed no remorse, standing emotionless and without any sign of guilt for murdering her children. While speculation continues, the motive behind Louise's actions remains uncertain. Despite undergoing a mental health assessment, no condition was diagnosed, and she was deemed to be of sound mind when the murders occurred. The prevailing theory is that Louise saw her children as obstacles, particularly to her immoral lifestyle, and decided to remove them. The aftermath of the case devastated all those connected to it. Louise's mother, Sharon Porton, fell into a deep depression, consumed with the belief that she could have done more to save her two young granddaughters. Tragically, on February 4, 2020, Sharon was discovered dead in her home, having taken her own life at the age of 40. The girl's father, Chris, also suffered unbearable anguish. He expressed profound regret, believing he should have pursued custody more strongly when he had the chance. The sorrow of never having met his 17-month-old daughter, Scarlett, continues to haunt him even 18 months after their deaths. In memory of Lexi Draper and Scarlett Vaughn, two sweet girls with bright smiles and lively personalities, a white horse-drawn carriage decorated in purple carried them to their final resting place. Their untimely deaths robbed the world of lives filled with endless potential. Moving on to the next case. Marilyn Ganderth. In the middle of nowhere, a dead body was discovered. A grandson who claimed he was forced to sign. This is the unsettling story of Marilyn Ganderth, a woman who placed her faith in those closest to her only to be deceived in the most heartbreaking manner. At exactly 6:56 a.m., a man named Harry Ganderth phoned 911. His residence was in Albuquerque, 20 miles south. He was 62 years old. She was known as Marilyn Ganderth. Her phone had been turned off for quite some time. That alone was enough to make her brother uneasy. Yet there was more. Her car was still there. He had left a note the previous day, but it remained sealed in the door. The meaning of these signs was evident. She had not been at home or moving anywhere. Harry disliked it intensely. When the police arrived and began piecing everything together, they started with Harry. He repeated what he knew. He explained that he rang the bell and knocked, but nobody answered. The phone was still off, going straight to voicemail. The vehicle had not moved. Then came the part that hurt more. Making friends had never been easy for Marilyn. Harry told them her world had shrunk over the years. First, her husband passed away. Then her son Ryan took his own life. After that, she gradually became isolated. Not much was happening, just stillness and silence. A missed call might not have bothered most people. But he knew his sister. She was dependable. It was no mistake when she failed to pick up. He did not completely grasp the warning yet, but it was present. They were speaking with the officer when a woman approached. Nicole Robinson, Marilyn's closest friend, had heard the news. She had known Marilyn for many years. They worked together at the post office. Marilyn always came to work and never missed a call. She also would never abandon her dog alone like that. The police searched the house for a possible entry point. Nobody had broken in. There were no signs of Marilyn and no shattered glass. That is not always reassuring, however. The officers circled the property. When they reached the garden, they tried peering inside through the blinds but saw nothing. As they circled again, that was when they noticed it. The back door stood wide open. That was the kind of detail that made no sense, which is exactly what made it so frightening. The police officers stopped Nancy from entering. Someone might still be inside, possibly armed. That meant she must not go in. Once assistance finally arrived, the officers advanced toward the open door. As usual, they called out while stepping through the entrance, but no one replied. They proceeded cautiously from one room to another, passing the garage, moving through the kitchen, and into the hallway. Something unusual appeared. Yet nothing seemed broken or forced. Pill containers and medical documents were scattered around. There were no signs of a struggle. Either someone had left in a hurry or had been taken before managing to gather their belongings. Then they noticed it. The house keys were still hanging on the outside of the front door. Harry had already pointed out that it was suspicious. The police agreed. Marilyn was not at the hospital, and she was not in the house. She had simply vanished. Soon the search expanded. Marilyn owned another house right next door. Alyssa, her daughter-in-law, used to rent it from her. Nancy informed the police that Alyssa and her family had recently moved out, but they might have seen Marilyn before she went missing. The officers went there to investigate further. It was the logical next step, and maybe something would connect. The garage door stood open when they arrived. An officer approached the parked truck. Alyssa, who was 43, was outside. She was moving items and clearing things from the property. Drake, her son, was there as well. A friend named Annie was present too. The timing was notable. Belongings were being packed, and boxes were stacked. The officers could hardly believe what they were seeing. Alyssa explained she was there to finish moving. She even offered to show her text messages to clarify everything. She scrolled through her phone. She showed them a message she sent to Marilyn on Friday, January 26th, at 10:35 a.m. That was the final time she had seen Marilyn. They had spent time together that day. So the police explained the situation. Now Marilyn could not be found. They needed to search the house one final time. Alyssa agreed immediately. She was willing to cooperate. She was not concealing anything. She had to move out, but did not have another place yet. The officers asked Alyssa if she had any idea where Marilyn might be at the moment. That was not unusual. Whenever Marilyn was upset, she sometimes became quiet and avoided people for a while. Detectives left Alyssa's house without discovering anything, but they did leave with something far more useful, a schedule. It wasn't sealed, but it was enough to work with. In this case, having something was better than having nothing. Marilyn wasn't like most people. Her brother, her best friend, and her daughter-in-law all spoke with her frequently. They all said the same thing. Marilyn was gone. She wasn't the kind of person to vanish overnight. But to understand, we need to go back a few days. In Rio Rancho, New Mexico, on the night of January 26, 2018, a woman was driving home from work. To her, it seemed like just another cold winter night. Then she noticed something along the side of the road, a dark pile that was burning. Black smoke lingered in the air. Whatever had been on fire left an impression she couldn't shake. As she drove on, it felt wrong somehow. By morning, she returned with her husband to look again. In the daylight, the scene was clearer. What they found was far worse than they had imagined. Without waiting, her husband grabbed his phone and called the police. At 11:42 p.m. on January 27th, a call came in to deputies. They went out to check if the report was real. When they reached the dirt road, it was obvious this wasn't trash. Even from a distance, something was off. The deputy got closer, saw the burned pile, then rushed back to his car to report what he found. It was a body. At first glance, it looked like a child or maybe a teenager. Metal chains clamped tightly around its wrists and ankles. The right foot had been severed cleanly. The mouth was frozen wide open, almost as if locked in a scream after death. This wasn't just a corpse, it was a message. It was meant to be seen. Naturally, the first people considered suspects were the ones who called it in. That was routine. But identifying the victim came first. At that moment, no one knew who it was. As word spread, tips poured in. Many pointed to different missing people. But one tip stood out. Nancy dialed the number because she feared the body could be her friend Marilyn's. Detectives requested Marilyn's dental records and passed them to the medical investigator's office. The confirmation came quickly. It was indeed Marilyn Gandert lying on the cot. The following day, officers went to Harry's house to deliver the news in person. They told him what, deep down, he already knew. Overcome with grief, he broke down in tears. Marilyn was more than just his sister. She was the one constant in his life. This was not something he could ever have prepared for. Not someone like her. She wasn't the kind of person to fall into trouble. Harry struggled to accept that someone so ordinary could have suffered something so horrific. Then he remembered Marilyn had been facing a rough time before she went missing, tied to her daughter-in-law. Alyssa hadn't been paying rent while living in one of Marilyn's homes. They weren't truly family in the traditional sense. Their relationship was already strained. It wasn't a bond you'd gamble your life on. Even though removing her seemed like the obvious choice, Marilyn's decision to kick Alyssa out might have been the final spark. Much of what concerned detectives was what Alyssa had avoided mentioning. Earlier, she told them she was simply moving out. But being evicted is not the same thing. Why hide the truth from investigators? Was it an attempt to take herself off the suspect list and redirect attention elsewhere? Or was it just a poorly chosen explanation? In situations like this, even small lies can grow into something bigger. For investigators, the job was never simple. They had a body. They had a name. It was time to examine the scene. Speaking with Nancy, detectives gathered more insights. Starting at Marilyn's home seemed logical. Yet a detailed search revealed nothing. No blood, no struggle. Everything was orderly, untouched. Clearly, whatever happened to Marilyn did not occur there. Attention then shifted to the rental property she had leased to Alyssa Bickett, her daughter-in-law. Alyssa had just been evicted, and it was far from an amicable process. Marilyn's brother explained she was exhausted by Alyssa's lies, unpaid rent, and constant stress. With Marilyn now gone, the rental house took on new significance. The next person investigators focused on was Drake, Marilyn's grandson. After the eviction, Drake and his girlfriend Nikki had relocated to a hotel. At this point, pieces were beginning to align: emotion, motive, and opportunity. Drake mentioned that Marilyn had come by the house while they were moving. For him, it seemed insignificant, but for investigators, it was crucial. That could have been the last time Marilyn was seen alive, and possibly where the crime took place. Detectives also noticed something unsettling about Drake. He appeared detached, calm to the point of indifference, barely alert, and showing no visible concern. At only 19, police initially gave him the benefit of the doubt. Still, his reaction stood out. He seemed more surprised that Marilyn's body had been discovered than concerned about what had happened to her. No shock, no denial, no grief. Investigators then turned to the house Alyssa had been evicted from, the suspected crime scene. Alyssa claimed she was simply there collecting her belongings. Concerned she might try to destroy evidence, police secured a search warrant and barred her from re-entering the property. At first glance, the place looked spotless. But as officers moved from room to room, they noticed something just inside the front door: a single drop of blood on the wall. Small, but enough to shift the tone of the entire search. While investigators combed through the house, word reached Alyssa that Marilyn's body had been found. She didn't react. Not a word. That silence made detectives uneasy. She also hadn't mentioned being evicted during her first interview, only that she was moving. By now, police knew better. Nancy, one of Marilyn's closest friends, filled in more details. Marilyn had grown frustrated after years of helping Alyssa, especially following her son Ryan's death. She had reached a breaking point. Marilyn demanded Alyssa either pay rent or show respect, something Alyssa wasn't willing to do. Eventually, Marilyn decided to sell the house, change the locks, and cut off ties. When questioned, Alyssa downplayed the tension. She insisted the move had been smooth, saying she and her friend Annie were packing without conflict. But Marilyn's decision to lock doors and monitor visits told a different story. That was when Annie Rail pulled up to the property. When asked about Marilyn, Annie claimed she barely knew her. Still, her guarded tone and defensive body language suggested otherwise. Plus, the more the police pressed her, the worse she felt. During this time, more information about Marilyn's body was given to the cops. She had been cruelly killed and then set on fire, after being doused in gasoline. As the cops thought about these new facts, they went back to Alyssa. At first, her story didn't seem very interesting, but things were starting to fall apart. She kept talking about the same thing when asked about it, but that didn't match up with what the police knew. She was no longer alive. Timelines didn't make sense, and Alyssa's story got weirder as she went on. Alarms went off when Alyssa's story kept changing. It was getting too expensive for the cops to ignore the growing doubts. They had no other choice but to act. Alyssa and Annie were both handcuffed and taken into prison to be questioned in a formal way. Medicine bottles and blood were found in Annie's truck when it was searched. She was actually caught in the act. It was no longer appropriate to ask nice questions. These people were thought to be guilty, and now they were going to find out what the two women knew. Drake was even arrested at the hotel. The police were ready for a big lead, but when Drake was arrested, they didn't expect him to make such a shocking statement. In earlier talks, he had seemed unconcerned, but when things got darker in the talk, the weight of what he said changed the whole investigation. At the start of the conversation, the detective said something straightforward. Drake didn't seem shocked or upset, but what he said next would change everything. Then he said something that shocked everyone in the room. Drake spoke right into the camera without any hesitancy. Drake said that Kennedy, his grandma, had asked him to kill her. The way he talked about it made me feel uneasy. It was almost like he was being forced to do this strange kind of job. It was like her words were burned into his mind, giving him a reason to do something he might not have done otherwise. Once Drake spoke, his words hung heavy in the air, and the officers pressed him harder to get the whole story. They needed the specifics, like the date, time, and way to do it. The people were curious about how he went from not wanting to take care of to killing her. His memories were all over the place, but the main idea of his story stayed the same. The police wanted to know more, but Drake wasn't ready to give them the whole story. He stopped short because he wouldn't go any further without a lawyer. The cops were left with more questions than answers because the door was locked. Drake had only said enough to back up what they already thought, not enough to solve the crime. That statement had a scary, final feel to it, but the real story of Marilyn's death was still out there. Alyssa told a story that was very different. There were more and more problems with what Alyssa said as she went on. From her point of view, the events were very different. She said that feelings were strong and angry urges took over. As Alyssa talked about what happened next, her fear was clear. She felt guilty and angry at the same time. She admitted to hitting Marilyn and tying her up when she was really upset. It was hard to tell if Alyssa was trying to explain what she did or just telling the story of what happened, but the fear in her voice was clear. Alyssa's story started to change as the questioning went on, especially when she talked about what happened afterward. She left Marilyn and Annie alone for a short time. When she came back, Annie was wiping a bloody knife. Each witness statement revealed a bit more of the dreadful reality, but investigators were still uncertain about who was orchestrating the crime and who was merely following instructions. Alyssa's final testimony introduced a chilling detail to the case. Yet one part of her account did not add up. She claimed she did not know where Drake was during the most crucial moments, which appeared to separate herself from Drake's involvement. The detective's suspicions grew stronger. Alyssa's effort to minimize Drake's role in the narrative, along with her omission of key details, made her seem less reliable with every passing moment. It did not make sense. If Marilyn had already been subdued, why would Annie suddenly stab her without any motive to kill? The officers struggled to piece together how Alyssa's version fit with the evidence they had. Gaps were already forming in her account, and it was evident what step needed to follow. Annie had to provide her explanation. When Annie was brought in for questioning, her testimony revealed yet another disturbing aspect of the story. The whole thing was organized. From Annie's perspective, Alyssa appeared in a different light. Alyssa did not simply stand by without action. She acted as the leader of the group. With every fresh statement, investigators moved closer to uncovering the complete crime. More chilling revelations emerged as the inquiry progressed. As the officers reconstructed the horrific events, they gained a clearer understanding of how a family descended into brutality and treachery. With each additional fact, the case shifted from a sorrowful killing to a terrifying, premeditated murder. Annie and Alyssa both confirmed one crucial point. Annie was the first person to put hands on Marilyn. However, their versions of events soon began to diverge significantly. Annie recounted the story in sharp detail, while Alyssa's account left out essential parts. The assault had been organized, but she failed to acknowledge that. Instead, she portrayed it as something that happened spontaneously. What stood out even more was her complete omission of Drake being present during the assault or the mission, which soon became a central focus of the detective's investigation. The specifics in Annie's statement grew more graphic, exposing the brutality of the assault in full. This confession cast even greater doubt on Alyssa's version, since it was obvious she had attempted to shield her son from the reality of how monstrous the crime truly was. As the investigation deepened, it became clear this was no sudden act of violence. The brutality suggested planning, and detectives soon uncovered that Alyssa, her son Drake, and their friend Annie were all part of the crime. The chilling truth emerged when Drake's girlfriend, Nikki, shared her account with police. According to Nikki, Alyssa and Annie threatened her with a knife and a gun, forcing her to help dispose of Marilyn's body. She described seeing Marilyn lying on the floor, bleeding, before Alyssa wrapped her in a sheet and loaded her into Annie's pickup truck. Nikki said she was then forced to drive to a remote area where Marilyn's body was dragged out, doused with gasoline by Alyssa, and set on fire. Nikki recalled watching the flames flicker in the rearview mirror as they drove away. Her story was soon backed up by hard evidence. Surveillance footage placed Annie's truck near the dumping site, and a forensic search uncovered Marilyn's blood, her purse, medications, and keys inside the vehicle. The proof was undeniable. What unfolded was a calculated, vicious murder carried out by a family bound together by anger, lies, and desperation. In May 2018, after months of investigation, arrests were finally made. Alyssa and Annie were charged with Marilyn Gandert's brutal murder. Prosecutors confirmed that Alyssa, Drake, and Annie had worked together, attacking Marilyn out of rage over the eviction. They beat her, restrained her, suffocated her with a bag, and ended her life before discarding her body and setting it ablaze. Annie, who admitted her involvement, testified against Alyssa and Drake, sealing the case against them. On October 3, 2019, sentencing was handed down. The judge acknowledged Drake's troubled background, but emphasized it did not excuse the cruelty of his actions. Alyssa was sentenced to 30 years, Drake to 26 years, and Annie to 12 years. The murder of Marilyn Gandert was more than a tragedy. It shattered bonds of trust and family beyond repair. Justice was delivered, but the loss and betrayal left wounds that will never truly heal. Moving on to the next case. Oksana Alex. In today's video, we look into a horrifying case that was not only seen but also filmed. A man ended the life of his wife in front of their little daughters, leaving behind a scene so disturbing it shocked even the most seasoned detectives. This is the tragic outcome of a man who had always escaped with his actions. He was furious, abusive, and possessive, and for years nobody acted. Every outburst and signal was ignored, which is why it reached this point. His wife had given him one final opportunity, one last chance for their household. Sadly, it was one too many. This man viciously murdered his wife while their children sat inside the vehicle, unable to intervene. In public, the assault took place in daylight, directly in front of their terrified girls. Cameras were recording at the scene of the attack, but what is left of his wife is far too graphic and heartbreaking to display. She lost her life because a man never stopped hurting her. How could matters reach this level? From the outside, they looked like any other household. Oksana Alex, 30, loved being a mother. The husband, Alexander Alex, is 31, and their children are Lena, 4, and Sasha, 2. Alexander and Oksana met in the Belotaki region of Russia in 2014. She came from the quiet town of Sokolki, and he was from the center of the district. Their bond was formed immediately. He swiftly became part of Oksana's family, and soon they were living together. They tied the knot in 2016 and welcomed their daughter Lena at the end of that year. 2 years later, her sister Sasha arrived. Oksana often told her friends how delighted she was to be a parent. She mentioned taking care of their vegetable plot and going on adventures with her daughters, whom she referred to as Girly Joyce. It was private, and she did not share much on social networks. Alexander, in contrast, had an open profile showing he enjoyed fishing, paintball, and outdoor life. Together, they operated a family enterprise, a traveling puppet theater. They performed in many regions of Russia. Others who knew about the venture stated that Oksana was the actual founder, the imaginative, dedicated, and determined energy behind it. A friend and colleague, who had known her for years, even offered her a position in the town of Uriazin. Oksana, however, declined, since her family came first. "I already have 2 adorable small kids," she said. "Work and my little daughters somehow got tangled together. Time never appears sufficient." Her dream was to relocate somewhere else one day, but she told her friends she was satisfied where she was for now. She remarked, "There are many dangers on the road. I'll wait until my daughters are older and more self-sufficient." Although the pandemic caused everything to be uncertain, she remained focused on her work. "I must not lose what I've created and must continue thinking of something new," she declared. From the outside, it appeared flawless, a young family building a life together. Alexander had a good relationship with Oksana's relatives. People from different backgrounds laughed at their puppet performances. Yet there was a dark side to her life that was only revealed after she was killed. The bedroom of Oksana and Alexander was often filled with shouting. The neighbors grew accustomed to the terrifying noises, though they still frightened them. One neighbor, Maria, recalled with a grimace, he assaulted her frequently, tormented her, and would not let her leave. "I really pity the girls. Their mother was no longer with them." The violence did not begin suddenly. Alexander had been furious for a long time. He was obsessive, suffocated with envy, and convinced himself Oksana was unfaithful. This false assumption consumed him, but earlier he was not always like that before she did it. Some of Alexander's companions remembered another side of him from school days. One former classmate, Alina, said truthfully, "I am stunned. How did he become so cruel?" But Regina, one of his schoolmates, described another aspect. She said he always trembled at school because he was so afraid. "We are all astonished. So does this prove that he could conceal his dark side whenever it benefited him?" This was not his first marriage. He had married a woman named Alina S. in 2010. At the beginning, things appeared fine. He became furious immediately because she was raising their son with someone else. Elena said he was unstable, quick-tempered, aggressive, and able to provoke a quarrel about anything. She could not even smile or nod at another man without sparking his jealousy. The mistreatment was not limited to words. It was rough and physically painful contact. He is even said to have assaulted Elena's mother. It is possible that Elena never shared everything he had done to her. She explained that certain memories were too unbearable to recall again. Elena eventually gained the strength to request a divorce after becoming exhausted from the constant abuse. That decision also drove Alexander into madness. Alex discovered that Elena had gone to a nightclub after their separation. He tracked her down, struck her publicly on the dance floor, and then pushed her in front of a moving vehicle to try to end her life. He faced charges of attempted murder, but Elena altered her statement after his family pressured her. Alex was no longer prosecuted and walked free. Ultimately, Elena said, "He tried to kill me. A criminal case was initiated, but his parents forced me to withdraw, so I did. This man is vicious and cruel. He is insane. No one speaks out about it. They were planning to commit him to a psychiatric facility after what he had done, but he managed to avoid it." His relationship with Oksana revealed just how insecure and jealous he was. While being interrogated, Alexander admitted that he constantly feared she was being unfaithful. Alex grew enraged because Oksana had a male friend. He convinced himself that this man would visit their home at night while he slept. Alexander inspected the seal on the front door each morning to see if it had been disturbed. He searched the yard for traces of tire marks. And every morning, Oksana had to repeat endlessly that she was innocent. Yet his suspicions never disappeared, nor did it put an end to the brutality. The assaults escalated until Oksana could no longer bear them. She separated from him and returned to live with her parents. For a short while, it appeared she was finally free. He was not finished with her, however. He pleaded for forgiveness and for another chance. Oksana gave in because she wanted her daughters to have a complete family. He was accepted back by her. Lubio, Oksana's sister, would later explain, he begged her for forgiveness. He was granted one final chance. Tragically, it proved to be the last in the end. The cruel things he did to her cannot even be expressed in words. This is not what we hoped would happen to our Oksana, Lubio said. Oksana preferred staying at home. Alexander was her first husband, and they shared 2 children. Oksana spent her entire life indoors. Everything she did was for her family. She managed everything on her own and never pressured her husband because she believed he might eventually change. She said her daughters needed a full family so they could remain close to both mother and father. Oksana returned, and life went on as before. Then, on July 29, 2020, everything shifted. The morning began like any other. There were no signs of what was about to occur. They took one of their daughters to the dentist due to a toothache. Yet there was no dentist in Bashka, which was a very small settlement. Therefore, her family got into the car and traveled to the nearby city of Saka, where she could receive the proper treatment. During the trip, they stopped to take a family photo near a beautiful stretch of land. That is when everything went terribly wrong. While in the vehicle, Oksana pulled out her phone, which enraged Alexander. He suspected something was wrong and demanded to see Oksana's text messages, but she refused because she was exhausted with his suspicions. Alexander suddenly became furious and reached into the glove compartment to grab a hunting knife. He stabbed her repeatedly in the chest, directly before their 2 daughters. It was horrific. Alexander deliberately stopped the bleeding. Oksana seized this moment to escape the car and stagger down the roadside, but her wounds were too severe, and she collapsed only a few meters away. At that moment, an older couple happened to be walking by and witnessed the events. They were too distant to intervene, but wise enough to record everything on their phones in case evidence was needed later. Alexander exited the car and approached Oksana, but a nearby driver stopped and shouted at him to stop. Still, it made no difference. Alexander calmly told him that his wife had been unfaithful and that it was her fault. He approached her and stabbed her again. And again. Everything took place in daylight, before witnesses and his 2 terrified daughters. When the eldest child, Lena, saw what had happened to her mother, she screamed and ran from the car toward her. But Alexander ordered her to stop. She was not supposed to witness what he had done to her mother. Not that. He shouted at the elderly couple, "Please take care of her," and pushed her toward them. Then he returned to his car, grabbed a bottle of water, and began washing his hands and knife to remove the blood. Immediately afterward, he rushed into the forest to hide the weapon. When he came back, something shifted again. Simply seeing Oksana's lifeless and broken body was not sufficient. Alexander went back to the car, took a penknife, and then walked toward his wife's corpse. He slit her throat and stabbed her multiple additional times. Truly, this was far too much. The daughter's cries are audible on the recording made by the witnesses. The voice behind the camera says, "That's it. A body without life." Alexander did not resist when law enforcement arrived. He quietly surrendered without uttering a word. At first, he stayed silent while being interrogated. Shortly after, however, his version changed. Reports stated that he claimed to hear whispers. He asserted that he was mentally unwell. Alexander told the judge in court, "She confessed to me that she cheated with her closest friend. I became enraged because of that. I do not understand why I struck her so many times or how I killed her. I fully acknowledge that I am guilty. I will not resist the police officer. That is what I admit." The court ruled that Alexander had murdered Oksana in an exceptionally cruel manner and in the presence of their daughters, inflicting unbearable psychological suffering on them. However, the judge also declared that he committed the act while insane. Alexander was diagnosed with a chronic mental illness that, according to the court, made it impossible for him to recognize what he was doing both before and after the killing. Rather than being sent to prison, he was placed in a secure psychiatric hospital to undergo treatment against his will. Physicians will review his condition every 6 months and inform the court whether he should remain confined or be released. But Oksana's relatives were outraged by this ruling. Oksana's brother stated, "I do not accept this decision. Naturally, someone who committed murder must face the law. I believe he is fine. I know him very well." Her mother, Alina, vowed to oppose the judgment. She believed Alexander had taken advantage of the system. He succeeded. That is what I believe. I do not trust him. I think he arranged everything in advance, even though he claims it was not intentional. He He wanted to provoke her anger, she said. Alina added that Oksana had been prepared to leave her husband, but refrained because she cared about their daughters. In the end, they will grow up without a mother, she said. She did not want them to be raised without a father. Oksana's sister, Lubio, also said she never cheated on him, and when could she have? She was constantly with the children. He held great control over her. He imagined betrayals everywhere. Even though Oksana was not the kind of person to betray, she still wanted to safeguard her family, but failed. The daughters of Oksana and Alexander are now being cared for by their grandmother. On that day, they lost both parents, which is profoundly tragic. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.